A wyvern flew freely through the skies, slicing through the clouds with elegance. This image became permanently etched in the mind of a young boy from the powerful magic house of Dekulin. On that day, he decided to abandon his life as a mere servant. The freedom shown by the wyvern in the air was the only reason he needed to change his destiny. Years later, that same boy, now a mage, stood with his hand extended, using his magic to choke another mage. The man, clearly at a disadvantage, tried to argue that the former servant had been hiding his true power all along. He claimed that what was being displayed now was not something a simple servant could do. However, the mage, cold and firm, ignored the words and kept control of the situation. He wanted answers, and he was the one asking the questions. The mage pointed to the book the man was holding and asked if it was a grimoire. The other man confirmed with difficulty and, even while under pressure, wanted to know if the mage had truly fought so many people just to capture someone like him. The answer was simple and direct. Caution was needed when dealing with members of the Dekulin family, and that was why he needed clear answers. He wanted to know how the man used the grimoire. The prisoner, his face already reddened by the magical pressure, admitted that he did not know, and in that moment the mage realized it made sense. If the greedy members of the Dekulin family had known how to use the grimoire, they never would have left it stored away in some random warehouse. They would have been using every last page. But then a question emerged. If they did not know how to use the grimoire, why were they hunting that man? Perhaps because the item had immense value. Value great enough to move even the most powerful members of the magic house. Desperate, the man begged the mage to hand over the grimoire, promising he would plead with the Dekulin family to spare his life. Otherwise, he warned, the mage would be hunted like an animal. The mage kept his serious gaze and asked if he really had that much power. And with that, he declared those would be the man's last words. The man tried to respond, but his throat, constricted by magical force, could not make a sound. Suddenly, the mage felt a new and intense presence approaching. It was someone with a powerful aura, impossible to ignore. A new man appeared, and with a calm and authoritative tone, acknowledged that the mage had excellent instincts. He introduced himself as Farron von Dekulin, the supreme leader of the Dekulin magical family, and said they could discuss the grimoire later, provided everyone there behaved. At that moment, the mage froze inside. He had served the Dekulin family for 10 years, half his life, but he had never seen the chief with his own eyes. This was the first time. The Dekulin house was the most powerful among the magical families of the Eastern continent, and now he was finally face to face with its leader. In silence, he reflected on the impression he had of that imposing man, and concluded, bitterly, that he was someone completely unpleasant. Farron reacted with confusion. He did not understand what the mage meant by that. The mage then accused him of trying to steal the fruits of another's labor, of attempting to take credit for magical achievements that had been earned through effort. He found it shameful that someone as powerful as Farron would stoop to such a level. Amid the tension, both of them laughed. It was a strange and uncomfortable laugh that echoed through that hostile place. But deep down, the mage who had once been just a servant was completely terrified. The mage stared forward intently and could not stop thinking that this was something truly serious. The very head of the Dekulin family had come after him in person. The presence of that man was anything but ordinary. He radiated power. He was, without a doubt, the strongest mage the former servant had ever seen up close. Farron von Dekulin, without hesitation, stated that it would be much easier to kill him and forcibly take the grimoire. However, he went straight to the point and proposed something unexpected. He said that if the mage handed over the grimoire and agreed to return to the service of the Dekulin family, he would forget everything that had happened and let him live. He regretted never having noticed the talent of that former servant before. He called him a mere vagabond from the black and white district, someone who had learned cheap tricks practiced only by servants. Yet even with that rudimentary knowledge, he had reached an impressive level of magic. Farron acknowledged there was talent there and affirmed that with the support of the Dekulin house, the mage could go much further. The mage sincerely considered the proposal. Returning to Dekulin seemed, for a brief moment, like a real possibility. Then he answered, saying that it was fine, but he would have one final condition. He would consider the offer only if he could become the leader of the family. He asked what Farron thought of that. It was a direct provocation. Farron's expression changed immediately. He was visibly irritated by what he had just heard. The mage then asked if he had not watched the battle. Without hesitation, he broke the neck of the prisoner still in his grasp, then asked if the leader of the family had any idea how many had already died in that same way. Farron stepped closer, slowly, and asked if he truly intended to act like that. He warned that if he continued down that path, he would end up dead. The mage admitted to himself that it was true. He was risking everything. He then moved toward Farron, convinced that the only way to truly measure strength was by comparing it to something else. He protected himself from the direct attack and did not back down. The family leader declared that he would put him in his place. He cast a spell and summoned a massive stone stake that shot directly toward the mage. The mage barely dodged it, but he noticed that he could not find any opening in Farron's defense. Farron von Dekulin told him that he was thinking too much. He cast another spell and slammed a stone wall against him, completely trapping him. He said that if the mage wanted to compare powers, that was fine. He was willing to show the true scale of the difference between them. An explosive spell followed, hitting the mage directly, as the wall had left him with no escape route. Even so, Farron confessed he had not used his full power. If he had, the mage would already be dead. He had spared him on purpose, and now wanted to know how that felt. Still standing, the mage asked what would happen if he accepted the proposal right then. Farron asked if he was being serious, but in the meantime, the mage was already preparing a new spell, this time a powerful lightning bolt. He said he might accept it, but he was tired. Tired of eating dog food. Tired of being treated like trash. Then, he fired his lightning with enough force to almost destroy the stone wall. Farron looked at the attack and replied that it was all nonsense. He struck his staff on the ground and summoned a magic circle so vast that it could be seen on the horizon. He finally revealed his true power. A colossal lightning bolt tore across the sky. The mage, stunned, remembered once again the day he had looked up and seen the wyvern flying freely, but now he also remembered the real reason he had looked to the sky back then. After the attack, Farron approached. He admired the fact that the mage was still alive. He said the mage was impressive and asked if he now understood the difference between their powers. The weakened mage asked if, after all that, Farron still wanted him to return as a mere servant. Farron, with a serious expression, replied that he had never said that during the battle. He did not want him to return as just a servant. He wanted him to become the leader of a vassal house of the Dequilin family. The mage was silent for a moment. He thought about how that man, the head of the Dequilin house, the most powerful in the eastern continent, with enough influence to rival the empire itself, was offering him command of a vassal house. He then picked up the grimoire and said, with a restrained smile, that it was indeed a good offer. Farron added that the mage still underestimated his own worth. He said he wanted not just the mage, but also the grimoire. When the mage finally held out the book, Farron declared that with that act, all his flaws would be erased. From now on, he would have the honor of standing with Dequilin. But at that moment, the mage simply burned the grimoire before everyone's eyes. Then, with sarcasm, he asked if Farron no longer wanted the book just because it was a little scorched. Farron, eyes narrowing in anger, stated that he would not have a peaceful death because of that. And the mage, unfazed, responded firmly. He told him to shut up and listen first. Originally, Aster had been just a servant, someone who solved problems quietly and did not care much about money. But everything changed the day he found that grimoire. His reason for taking it was not ambition, but justice. He got involved in the case of an old colleague, also a servant, who had been devoured by the young master of the Dequilin family. It was a crime covered up with forbidden magic, and everyone pretended nothing had happened. Farren von Dequilin, the head of the family, accused Aster of having used that kind of magic. Aster confirmed it without hesitation. He said the real culprit had been the young master, and that the family had merely hidden what had truly happened. Farron then asked if all of that was for revenge, but Aster answered with honesty. He knew that his life, like the lives of the other servants, meant nothing in the eyes of that family. Even so, all he ever wanted was to help those who could not defend themselves. He knew that to do that, he would need a lot of money. That was why he had decided to retire for good. He no longer wanted to live in the little doghouse the Dequilin family offered their servants. The family leader declared that he had heard enough final words. He then summoned the blue flame, the greatest pride of the Dequilin bloodline, a flame that never extinguished and was said to make anyone regret to the bone. But Aster, standing before the fire, thought that regret was an empty word. Considering the miserable life he had lived, dying did not seem so bad, and when the flames engulfed his body, he felt something unexpected. Freedom. At the very moment he should have been burned to ashes, the fire stopped. Not only that, but time itself froze around him. The grimoire he had burned with his own hands reformed before his eyes. Then, the magic of the book lodged itself directly in his chest. He had no idea what was happening. In the blink of an eye, he was no longer on the battlefield, but in a dark alley. Confused, Aster wondered if he had not been dying just moments ago. Everything felt strange, yet familiar. He looked around and recognized the place. He was back in the black and white zone, also known as the gray zone. That was where he had lived before becoming a mercenary. It was where he had begged to survive, and when he saw his reflection in the dirty water running like sewage, he saw his own face, but younger. It was definitely him, but he had become younger. The only thing that remained from his old body was the mark of the grimoire engraved on his chest, and he began to wonder if that book was really that powerful. Could it actually make someone go back in time? Even though it was a rare and precious item, Aster did not know much about it. In the end, he thought that maybe this second chance was something good. He was almost certain it was not a dream. After all, the stench of the gray zone's sewage was still exactly the same. In that moment, he realized he could now give it his all. He had the chance to do everything differently, and maybe make it work this time. But what did make it work really mean? He remembered an old dream, the dream he and his friend once shared. That memory was what had motivated him to finally abandon the life of a servant. In that forgotten past, he and his friend used to talk about their miserable childhood. They were both born as beggars in the gray zone. They had nothing, no clothes, no food, and certainly no education. And his friend once asked which of the three was the worst to be without. Aster replied that it was hunger, but the other disagreed. He said that if it were only hunger, they would still be alive and fighting. The real reason their lives had taken such a cruel path was the lack of education. If they had studied, maybe they would not have been enslaved by arrogant nobles. That friend, during that conversation, revealed his greatest wish. When they finally retired from that life, he wanted to build a library, a place where anyone could enter, no matter if they had money, power, or noble blood. Everyone would be able to read, learn, and study freely. And now, in the present, Aster, with all those memories pulsing in his heart, decided to aim even higher. He did not want to build just a library. He wanted to build a tower of magic. There was no practical practical reason for it. He just liked grand things. The location did not matter. What truly mattered was what he would place inside it. All kinds of books from every kind. And right at the entrance, on the very first floor, he would place the secret manual of the Dekulin family. He wanted even beggars to have a copy. The same knowledge the Dekulin family had hoarded for generations would now be there, within reach of everyone. Just imagining it made his mouth water. But now he had another problem. How to get his hands on that manual again. That was a problem for the future. For now, Aster needed to deal with the present. Right then, Aster took a direct kick to the face. A boy with an aggressive look asked if he was trying to hide. He wanted to know where the money was, calling him a miserable beggar. Aster thought the situation was bad, but after surviving countless battles in the past, that would not be the thing to break him. Angry, he grabbed the boy's foot and tried to fight back, but his punch was weak and poorly aimed. He missed completely. Confused, he wondered why his hand was not moving properly. Right after that, he was punched again and kicked once more. The pain was intense, not just in his body, but also in his heart. The humiliation was what hurt the most. By a twist of fate, the boy slipped on a stone and fell straight into the sewer. Taking the opportunity, Aster stood up and ran, but even as he escaped, he swore to himself that he would remember the face of that kid. He did not consider it a retreat, but rather a strategic withdrawal. After all, he was a veteran mercenary, and mercenaries do not know the meaning of giving up. Later, lying in a dark alley, Aster examined his wrist. It was dislocated, probably because of the poorly aimed punch from earlier. He felt pathetic. He admitted to himself that his body was too weak. That reality was hard to accept, so he decided that his plans for the Tower of Magic would have to wait. Before anything else, he needed to fix his own body. While he thought about this, a little boy approached. He asked if Aster was hungry. Aster was confused and asked if they knew each other, but as he looked more closely, he realized he had no idea who that boy was. He was filthy from head to toe, but despite being worn out, his clothes looked expensive. Maybe he was a noble child caught up in some kind of power struggle. He looked like a ticking time bomb about to go off, and that put Aster on alert. The boy introduced himself as Damien and said his mother's name was Bianca. Still suspicious, Aster asked if he had hit his head somewhere. Damien, however, claimed he did not have a mother. Aster replied that he also had neither a mother nor a father, so technically he was winning. He thought it would be best to get away from that kid as soon as possible. It all smelled like trouble. He decided to send him away before something worse happened. Even so, Damien stood right beside him and said he would go with him. When Aster told him to leave, the boy simply pointed to his injured hand and asked if it hurt. He said he could heal it. Then, with a simple gesture, he used a healing spell. Aster froze in surprise. That was not ordinary magic. It was the light of healing, a secret and legendary technique from the ancient Blandor family, a powerful bloodline that had fallen into ruin due to the Dekulin family. Aster's mercenary instincts immediately flared. This was no coincidence. He was definitely getting involved in something rotten and extremely dangerous. But the question that would not leave his mind was, why was a child of the Blandor family in the gray zone? At that time, the Blandors should still have been at the height of their power. He called the boy again, and as he looked him in the eye, finally noticed the details of his face. His eyes were of different colors. In that instant, Aster remembered who he was. That was Damien von Blandor, the legendary monster of mismatched eyes, a being who, in the future, would be known as the Immortal Butcher, a monster that did not die, even when decapitated or torn apart. And now, right in front of him, he was just an innocent, smiling child, like any other. It was hard to imagine he would become that abomination. Aster remembered the mission he received before going back in time. As a mercenary, he had been sent to Blandor territory under direct orders from the Dekulon family. He and his companions knew the Blandor were powerful and capable of defending themselves. Even so, they were sent there. One of the mercenaries mentioned having heard that a monster was invading the region, a being that healed itself constantly and had probably already killed many. At the time, Aster thought it was some kind of orc or goblin, but when he arrived, he saw it with his own eyes. It was not some random creature. It was a human, a boy, using unique magic with infinite healing, tearing people apart while laughing like a maniac. It was Damien, the same one who was now standing in front of him, but at that moment, he was still just a hungry, kind child. Damien said he wanted to eat. He was very hungry. He said his mother always told him that to grow up strong, he needed to eat well. Aster asked if he happened to have any money. To his surprise, Damien pulled out a pouch filled with gold coins. Aster looked at it, smiled, and said that from that moment on, they were friends. He called Damien his new best buddy and declared that it was time to eat. Later, in a simple inn, Aster enjoyed the moment with a full stomach and a clean body after a good bath. While he rested, Damien looked around with curiosity and said he did not know there could be a house above the place where people ate. He said he used to sleep in the street, and that this was his first time in a place like that. He also revealed that he had no father, which made Aster think that it was not a competition of tragedies. Even so, he asked Damien if he had a mother. The boy just answered with a vague question, asking if she was supposed to be there, and soon made it clear that he thought maybe she did not even exist. Aster realized he still did not fully understand the boy's situation, so he asked how long he had been alone. Damien responded in a confusing way, saying he had run away from his family and had slept more than 10 times, so that would mean 10 days? But he corrected himself, saying he slept more than twice a day, which would lower the actual number, maybe 5 days, or maybe 3 or 4. It was hard to know, and Aster concluded that the the boy was kind of an idiot after all. Still, Damien mentioned that he hadn't slept well in a long time, since the ground was too hard. Out of patience for more confusion, Aster buried his head in the pillow and thought that Damien really said nonsense, like a lunatic. Even so, as long as they were together in that gray zone, he could look after the boy like some kind of babysitter. Deep down, Aster thought it wouldn't be so bad to form some kind of bond with Damien. Having someone nearby might help in the future confrontation against the Deculin, and besides, noble families usually had many spells recorded in books, which could be useful for him to build his own power base. Of course, before anything else, Aster needed to deal with his own problems. He had to find that kid who fell into the sewer, uncover the meaning behind the 7 marks on his chest, and focus on what truly mattered. And now, with everything calm, he decided to do exactly that. Damien wasn't getting in the way. On the contrary, he even showed curiosity by asking if he was going to practice magical breathing. Aster replied yes, and Damien said he would try the same later. As he focused, Aster remembered his past life. Back then, he had built his magical foundation using simple spells, taught only to mercenaries, but the limits of that were all too clear. That was why he started stealing spells from nobles, nearly dying many times. Still, it was thanks to that he learned valuable techniques like the knight's body hardening, spirit summoning, alchemy, and other rare skills. Before dying in that life, he had come into contact with a power absurdly superior. In front of it, he felt like a flea compared to the immense power of Faharn. That was why, now that he had a new chance, he wanted to surpass that limit. This time, he would learn something greater. He would pursue the foundation used by the Deculin themselves, the Celestial Origin technique. This was a required art among them, capable of unlocking the use of all mana attributes. He had once memorized this technique during research, and now he would finally put it into practice. However, as he began the exercise, the symbol marked on his chest started to burn. It was as if fire were running through his veins. He understood that this was a result of impurities accumulated within his body. Then he remembered a high-level spell used by nobles. This spell forced mana through the body and burned the impurities in the magical circuit. To endure it, he cast a mana bath on himself, completely immersing in pure energy and concentrated magic. When he woke up, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. Beside him, Damien was sleeping soundly in his bed, but Aster knew he had succeeded. There were no more impurities in his magical circuit. His mana was purified. Even so, facing the Deculin would still be a major challenge. At least now his chances had increased. He had once been a mercenary, someone used to surviving even in the worst situations, someone who never gave up. Now he was even more prepared, and the next morning, Damien appeared with his hair dyed light brown. Aster noticed he had hidden his most striking features and changed out of his noble clothes. If he was really being hunted, this would help keep him safe. Damien looked at him excitedly and asked what they would do now. For the first time, Aster might have been genuinely happy not to be alone anymore. He replied with determination that it was time to stir up some trouble, and then the two headed straight for the back alleys, where the street kids and little pickpockets gathered. When they arrived, the oldest among them looked at Aster with surprise and sarcastically asked where he had been. He wanted to know if Aster had taken a bath in the sewer because of his strange appearance. When they got to the alleys, the oldest of the boys looked at Aster with contempt, noticing he was accompanied by someone who looked like he came from a rich family. However, Aster didn't give time for mockery and landed a punch straight into the boy's stomach. Still remembering the last time he had been harassed by him, he warned that this was only the first of 123 punches as payback. The commotion caught the attention of the other street kids, who immediately charged at Aster and Damien, but Aster already knew all of them. Even surrounded, he was ready for a good fight, and that's what happened. In the middle of the scuffle, Damien, excited as if it were a game, asked if it had already started. After a few minutes, Aster was completely dominating the fight. He delivered punches in all directions, hitting heads, legs, and stomachs with precision and strength. Damien, watching closely, noticed that Aster was using mana in his fists. He channeled magical energy into his punches, making each blow even more powerful. Impressed, the boy followed everything with fascination, feeling like he was learning just by watching. And when Aster knocked down another boy near Damien, the latter stepped in and used his healing magic on the injured one. Aster thanked him, satisfied, since the healed boy could now take a few more hits. The fight went on until sunset. Aster, already shirtless, treated it as training. He used the blows to strengthen his body, practically whipping the opponents who could still stand. Kindly, he asked Damien to heal another one, even though the boy was already terrified. That kid had been healed so many times he no longer knew if he was being helped or punished. To him, Aster and Damien seemed like real demons, and every time someone was healed, it was just to be beaten again. By the end of the day, with all the boys defeated and exhausted, Aster thanked each of them. They stood in a line, obedient, looking like little soldiers in formation. Aster said he was proud of them, and thought to himself how satisfying it had been to punch each of them in the head over 100,000 times. When one of them asked if they could leave, saying they had already taken enough hits, Aster agreed. But the boy commented, innocently, that the alley was actually his home. Aster thought he was asking for too much. So, in the end, they all ended up sleeping on the streets. Before they could fully leave, Aster felt something strange. A different presence was approaching. It was silent, fast, and carried a malicious energy in the air. Everything suggested it was an enemy, maybe even the one who had been chasing Damien. Aster quickly realized that his current body was not fit to manipulate magic efficiently. but that did not matter much. In his life as a mercenary, he had survived without relying on magic. Now he would do the same. He gathered all the mana he had left, channeling it to his fingertips, preparing a single, concentrated, powerful shot. He knew he would only have one chance. But, surprisingly, when the mysterious figure drew near, it simply kneeled before Damien and looked relieved. He called the boy young master with emotion. Damien, confused, recognized the man and called him Alfredo. The man confirmed his identity, saying he had been searching for the boy for a long time, asking where he had been and what he was doing. He also said he would not let go of him until he returned to the family. Astor, watching the scene, had a disgusted expression. Meanwhile, Alfredo apologized and properly introduced himself as the butler of the Blandor family. He said that young master Damien seemed happy with Astor and for that reason, suggested that they both return together to the Blandor territory. Astor paused for a moment. He knew that prestigious families like that one rejected anything considered impure or dishonorable. He did not know Alfredo's intentions well, but that did not matter. He already had in mind the goal of creating a connection with the Blandor family. Conveniently, the Blandor territory was on the way to the capital, where the Xenion Academy was located. Considered the best in the East, it also had the most renowned library in the region, perfect for someone who wanted to build a magic tower. That was essential for Astor's growth. For that reason, he accepted Alfredo's invitation and decided to go with him. Although he knew he was straying a bit from the original plan, Astor understood that this would be important for his future. He even wondered if the food there would be good. And after some time traveling by carriage, they finally arrived at Blandor territory. It was the first time Astor officially set foot there. The mansion was imposing, with beautiful gardens and servants everywhere, taking care of every detail efficiently. Alfredo then handed the responsibility to Lancy, an elegant and firm woman who approached with respect. With a formal smile, she asked young master Damien to enter the house. And after a few discreet pats to hurry him along, the boy finally stepped into the mansion, marking the beginning of a new chapter. Later, Alfredo went to the lady of the house's quarters to personally inform her that the young master had finally returned. He explained that although he had been found in the gray zone, he was now safe, back in Blandor territory. Upon hearing that, the woman became furious. Her expression twisted in anger and, with explosive energy, she loudly questioned how he had ended up in the 7th gray zone. She wanted to know if Damien was truly alright, and warned that if even a single hair was missing from her son's head, there would be no forgiveness. Alfredo kept a calm posture and asked the madam to listen to everything he had to report before drawing any conclusions. When she heard the full story, her expression changed. Although anger was still present, she admitted feeling relieved. For her, knowing that her son was safe was what truly mattered. Alfredo silently thanked the heavens that everything had gone well, because he knew that facing the fury of a woman known as the Blood Witch was not something easy to endure. Even so, she acknowledged the butler's effort and said he had done an excellent job that day. Alfredo humbly replied that he was only doing his duty, but he mentioned there was something that deserved special attention. He explained that the boy named Astor, Damien's friend, had noticed his presence even while he was using advanced concealment techniques. What was most surprising was that the boy had been prepared to respond with a concentrated magical attack. According to Alfredo, such perception and readiness were not common. It was evident that Astor possessed special abilities. The madam agreed, saying it was remarkable to see a child with that level of talent living in the gray zone. With that in mind, Alfredo decided to take action. The next morning, he sought out Astor and made a direct request. He wanted him to become his successor as the chief butler of the Blandor family. He thought that was a great opportunity for the boy and expected to see him surprised by the proposal. But Astor naturally said he would not accept. That caught Alfredo off guard, making him wonder if he had heard correctly. Even Damien looked confused by the refusal. Astor, however, was straightforward. He thanked him for the offer and said he was truly honored by the consideration, but he preferred to continue as he was. It was not out of disrespect, just a personal choice. Alfredo remained silent for a moment. He thought about the boy's past. Astor had been born in the gray zone and had learned magic by himself, relying only on natural talent. It was admirable, and he, Alfredo, had also come from a common family. He knew what it was like to grow up not knowing where one's own limits lay. He told Astor that the world was vast, and that, at that moment, he might feel too confident, thinking he could achieve everything. But Astor replied that he did not have such ambition. He did not want to rule the world, nor saw himself as invincible. That irritated Alfredo. He held himself back from losing control, and asked if Astor at least knew the story of the Goblin of the Canyon. It was a creature that lived only in its small territory, believing it was the strongest, the richest, and the most feared, until it realized the world was much larger. But Astor replied lightly, saying he identified more with a wyvern, which only increased Alfredo's frustration, and he eventually lost his patience. He said that Astor knew nothing, that he was ignorant, and promised to personally show him how terrifying and grand the world truly was. He took the boy to a training area where other adolescents of the Blandor house were practicing practicing. They were all around Astor's age and had been recognized as young talents. Astor observed attentively and acknowledged that the Blandor house took training very seriously. The adolescents had refined mana and well-developed auras, though their eyes slightly resembled those of goblins, filled with pride and disdain. Alfredo watched his reaction, and Astor admitted that he could feel something in the atmosphere. Still, he made it clear that he would not accept the offer of becoming a successor, because he hated the light. In a symbolic sense, something related to noble life and rigid obligations. At that moment, one of the trainees raised his hand. It was Winstor, who asked permission to speak to Alfredo. He claimed that Astor had only refused the offer because he had not yet felt the weight of true power. He said he wanted to show a little of his magic, not as an official duel, but simply as a demonstration, so that the boy could understand what he was dealing with. Alfredo recognized the arrogance in Winstor's words, but found the idea acceptable. A light confrontation could be enlightening. He asked Astor what he thought about it. A friendly match, without resentment. Astor, however, knew exactly what that meant. To all those boys there, he was just a lucky beggar who had appeared out of nowhere, an intruder in their territory. And now, he was about to be challenged. Everyone was probably thinking the same thing. At that moment, Alfredo allowed Astor to choose who he wanted to fight. Without hesitation, the boy pointed to 5 names. It would be a 5-against-1 fight. He seemed overly confident, and even provoked his opponents, as if asking whether they were afraid of dying. His attitude surprised many, including Alfredo himself, who became nervous, but ended up laughing. To him, that was the true spirit of combat. However, he made a condition. He said Astor would have only 1 minute. If he managed to endure 60 seconds against 5 mages at once, he would win a prize. If he failed, he would have to take responsibility for insulting their families. Astor, on the other hand, believed that old man was trying to trap him as a successor, but he still accepted the proposal. Later, everyone was already gathered, ready to watch the match. One of the instructors warned Alfredo that it was dangerous, but he replied that the boy's stubbornness needed to be broken, and this was the only way he would learn. The instructor then realized Alfredo had made up his mind, and if anything happened to the young master's guest, his own career as an instructor would be at risk. Meanwhile, Damien watched everything with excitement. Even after being warned that his friend was in danger, he only reacted with surprise and an excited smile. The instructor, seeing there was no way out, became tense. Lancy, another person present, said that if the instructor got involved in that fight, Madame Gamma would be furious. Alfredo, however, ordered the match to begin, and one of the instructors confirmed it, even knowing that orders are orders, whether he liked it or not. Lancy turned to Damien, asking him not to interfere and to promise he would return soon. But Damien, with a mischievous smile, already showed he would not follow that advice. One of the instructors explained that the duel would take place in turns, but Alfredo disagreed, saying they should all fight at the same time. The instructor accepted and explained that the fight would continue until one side surrendered. However, he reserved the right to interrupt the duel if the situation became dangerous. Meanwhile, Winstor, one of the opponents, was furious with Astor, calling him a damned beggar. He promised to make the boy pay and prove that he was nothing. But as soon as the duel began, in a single second, a spell cast by Astor flew past the instructor and hit Winstor directly. The blow was so strong that he nearly collapsed, and the other 4 mages were already unconscious. Out of the fight in just an instant, Astor remained calm and declared that now everyone would understand who they were dealing with. Winstor, still dizzy, noticed that the boy had several magic missiles ready in the palms of his hands. Even so, he judged them to be basic techniques, since those missiles consumed a lot of mana and were not very practical in real combat. However, Astor showed he should not be underestimated. He fired a magical missile directly at the head of each opponent, still moving, and explained that the world was cruel and merciless. Next, Winstor took a punch straight to the face and fell, defeated. Astor announced that those would be his teachings. One of the boys shouted that it did not even look like magic, but Astor replied that it was indeed a form of body magic. The kick that followed, charged with mana, was so powerful that it broke Winstor's teeth, while everyone around watched in horror as 5 teenagers were literally beaten and trampled by him. Alfredo, upon seeing the result, began to reflect. It really seemed like a compressed magic missile. Judging by the intensity of the spell, it might have been compressed 4 or 5 times. He came to the conclusion that if he had been hit by that during his first encounter with Astor, he would have faced serious trouble. He also could not understand how that boy was so good at fighting. Where did this ability to beat others come from? At that moment, Damien stepped in to help. Using his healing magic, he tried to restore the wounded, once again showing his kind and gentle nature. But the situation became even more serious when Madame Gammo, head of the house, appeared. The instructor immediately thanked Lentz, who had helped calm her down. Madame Gammo then approached, observing the chaotic scene, and firmly asked what exactly had happened there. Alfredo tried to justify himself by saying he was conducting a test, but she retorted that it was not a test, it was a massacre. Seeing the condition of the injured youths, she called out Damien, who was still trying to heal them. She ordered everyone to leave immediately. Damien was to return to his room, and Astor as well. Then, she addressed Instructor Ruffet, informing him that he was fired. Later, Madame Gammo met with Alfredo. She was clearly disappointed. She said she did not know what his true intentions were, but made it clear he had crossed the line. Alfredo apologized, acknowledging his lack of restraint and saying he would accept any punishment. But Madame Gammo continued questioning how he could allow Aster to fight alone against several novices. She also wanted to know if Damien had helped the boy in any way. Alfredo explained that there was no secret plan. The truth was that Aster was simply very skilled. He talked about the magic missile he had used during the duel. It was the same one he had mentioned earlier. According to him, he had compressed that spell 4 or 5 times, significantly increasing its power. Madame Gamo remarked that this meant the boy had excellent mana control. She had not witnessed the duel herself, but she imagined it must have been impressive. After all, he had defeated 5 rookies alone using just a single magic missile. Alfredo also shared that Aster had rejected the offer to become his successor. That made Madame Gamo realize she needed to reevaluate her view of the boy. She ordered that he be brought to her. Later, when he arrived, she was accompanied by little Damien, who seemed cheerful as he offered cookies to the guest. Before anything else, Madame Gamo gave him the prize that Alfredo had promised if he won the challenge. Aster quickly noticed that it was a high-grade pill, something reserved only for the top 5 recruits of the Blandor house. That made him suspicious. In the world he came from, good deeds usually amounted to giving food to poor kids like him. Receiving such a valuable gift made it clear there had to be something behind it, but Madame Gamo assured him he could accept it without worry. Besides having won the duel fairly, he had also helped Damien during the incident in the gray zone. This was also a way to apologize for what had happened earlier. Still suspicious, Aster asked if he had to join the Blandor to use the pill. Madame Gamo said no. He insisted, asking if she was sure there was no poison. Again, she said no. He even asked if there was any hidden reason behind the gift, but she kept denying it. Only then did he accept the gift and thank her. Changing the subject, Madame Gamo said she had another proposal for him. Aster already had an idea of what she wanted. He assumed she was trying to secure him a spot at the academy, just like Damien. She then explained that Damien was actually supposed to have enrolled the previous year, but he had refused so firmly that they postponed his admission to this year. The problem was, he still kept running away from the idea. Madame Gamo said that Damien liked Aster a lot, and then the boy cheerfully said that if his friend went, he would go too. Aster understood the weight of the proposal. For the family, it was a big issue for the heir of the house to refuse to attend the academy. At the same time, it represented a great opportunity for him. The academy was one of the most respected places in the world, and in this world, connections were everything. Earning academic backing was highly valuable, but still, it felt like they were trying to put a collar around his neck. That was why he replied that he would think about it. Madame Gamo then brought up another subject. She said it might not be directly related, but she wanted to know why he had refused Alfredo's proposal. At that moment, Aster discreetly looked toward the door and noticed that Alfredo was standing behind it, listening to everything. With a mocking tone, he said that he cared a lot about his knees. Madame Gamo did not understand what he meant, but Alfredo, hearing that, was visibly shocked. Later, Aster was in his room again, focusing as he used the high-level item he had received. The magical breathing technique he practiced significantly increased his mana. His physical body still needed improvement, but he was impressed by the smoothness of the process. Normally, when someone absorbed that much spiritual power, they suffered from internal stone formation or impurity buildup. However, he did not feel any side effects. As he continued training, his thoughts returned to the academy proposal. There were many benefits to accepting. He could even find a patron there. Still, no matter how much he reflected on it, everything felt like a well-constructed trap. So, he decided to go out for a walk to clear his head. But the moment he left his room, he had the clear impression that someone was waiting for him. In front of him stood a silver-haired boy. At first, Aster thought he might be from a collateral bloodline, since the only direct descendant he knew was Damien. When the boy asked if he was Aster, he replied no, but the other insisted. He said he had dark hair, an annoying look, and that the description matched perfectly. Aster, with his usual mocking tone, asked how anyone could think his annoying expression was sweet, and then tried to make the cutest face he could. The boy took a closer look, and to his surprise, commented that his expression actually looked gentle. He apologized for the misunderstanding, but Aster responded with a well-delivered middle finger. At that moment, Alfredo showed up and ruined everything. Alfredo apologized again, respectfully addressing him as Mr. Aster. Alfredo then remarked that kneeling would not be necessary if Aster became his successor, and asked him to reconsider. That was when Aster realized his whole plan to escape that conversation had just been destroyed. The silver-haired boy, who had still been trying to provoke Aster, fell completely silent when Alfredo gave him a simple look. His presence alone was enough to end any jokes. Aster said he would deal with that situation later. He was determined to correct the attitude of the boy who had provoked him. When Alfredo asked if something was wrong, he replied that it was nothing serious. He only made it clear that, when the time came, he would meet that boy again. Then he asked the head butler if he could meet with Madame Gamo, and later he was welcomed into her office. Madame Gamo was direct in asking if he had made his decision. Aster confirmed that he would join the academy alongside Damien. She thanked him for the quick response, and said they would take all the necessary steps right away. She also told him to make himself at home. When Alfredo showed up to hear the news and found out Aster was truly going to the academy, he was thrilled. He declared that this was the right spirit, the passion, the fire in the eyes he had been waiting for. He said the first semester could be covered by them, but the next one would be more difficult, especially for a boy coming from the gray zone. Getting enrollment for the second semester would require a lot of effort. Even so, Alfredo said he would help him. He would be his angel, his personal sponsor. Alfredo, with pride, called himself the guardian of that future student. Madame Gamo commented that he was being very loud, and Alfredo, a little embarrassed, apologized, and said he would head to the kitchen since it was almost lunchtime. Observing that unusual joy, Madame Gamo began to understand why Alfredo was so excited. After having his succession proposal rejected so many times, he was finally seeing a new chance emerge. Even so, she thought the academy plan was flawed from the beginning. She suspected that Alfredo might be getting fooled, just like the former head butler had been. Deep down, she felt a bit sorry for him. Later, Aster went to the Mage Tower where, according to earlier information, one of the academy leaders was waiting for him. As soon as he arrived, he was greeted by a hooded man who led him to a room where another man awaited. The hooded man warned him to be careful as he passed through the door. Aster entered a dark, dusty office with papers scattered all over the floor. There, he met Wenji von Blandor, a man much older than he had imagined. He also discovered that this was the brother of the boy who had provoked him earlier. During his life as a mercenary infiltrating various academies, Aster had learned an amusing truth about scholarly mages, often referred to by veterans as pen holsters. They usually had messy hair and, from pulling their own strands while studying, ended up bald. According to him, the first stage was denial, when the mage still wore a hood to hide hair loss. In the second stage, they would accept their baldness, even if reluctantly. In the third stage, they shaved their heads completely. In the final stage, they would try to invent impossible spells to regrow their hair. So far, no one had succeeded. But surprisingly, Wenji was different. First, Wenji apologized, saying that his younger brother had likely made a mistake and unfairly spoken ill of him. He stated with certainty that the young master's guest would never behave disrespectfully. Aster then asked if he worked at the Magic Academy. Wenji confirmed, explaining that he was currently the vice-rector of the institution. This surprised Aster, as someone so young holding such a high position within the academy meant he had to be extremely talented. After all, the Blandor family would never place someone from a collateral bloodline in that role without a good reason. Wenji then commented that Aster was different from the other young men he knew, especially compared to the rebellious nobles from traditional families. This left Aster even more confused. The man in front of him was not bald, did not have dark circles under his eyes, and was even smiling. He seemed to completely break the stereotype of a mage that Aster had formed. During the conversation, Wenji also congratulated Aster for being accepted into Xenion Academy, explaining that he himself had graduated from there, specifically from class 145. But he soon apologized for going on for too long and decided to get straight to the main point. He asked if Aster would risk his own life for a friend. He said that this was something that directly affected the reputation of the Blandor family, and if the answer was yes, then he could entrust him with something valuable. It was then that, in front of Aster, the secret book of healing light appeared. Meanwhile, Madame Gamo was calmly tending her garden. She was thinking about how Damien's sudden decision to go to the academy had resolved so many problems that once seemed impossible to handle. She considered Aster to be a great friend. She recognized that he had talent, a polite personality, and although Alfredo sometimes said he was a bit shameless, to her that was normal for someone their age. But what pleased Madame Gamo the most was the fact that Aster, even after finding out who Damien really was, had not changed his attitude. He remained himself, without trying to please too much or pulling away. In her mind, that made him someone different, someone who truly deserved to be by her son's side. Still, she also understood that Aster was the type of person who did not belong anywhere or to anyone. He was like a bird out of its cage, naturally free. But even knowing that, she knew she had to keep that boy close. That was why she decided that the Book of Healing Light should be offered to him. The moment the book was presented, Aster immediately thought it was a trap. However, Wenji's eyes seemed too clear and transparent for someone who was hiding something. Even so, Aster realized he would never fully understand that man. Wenji's eyes were like those of a perfect assassin, completely emotionless. They looked like the eyes of someone wearing a mask so well built that not even he could see his true self anymore. Wenji then spoke seriously, saying that this was not a joke. He also warned that the answer could not be given carelessly. Still, Aster remained calm. He thought there was no reason to feel uncomfortable there. Deep down, he believed they were in the same boat. He said that if there was something Wenji wanted to know, he could ask. If it was possible to do, he would do it. If not, then he would not. It was that simple. Wenji, however, said that just hearing what he had to say would already put Aster's life at risk. If he refused, he might need to be killed. Aster, without hesitation, responded with contempt. He thought that you only have one life anyway, and this was already his second. Let him try, if he wanted. The provocation was so direct that Wenji lost his patience and released his mana. The magical pressure was so intense that objects around them started levitating from the power. However, Aster stood firm, showing no fear. This satisfied Wenji. He realized the boy had passed the test. In truth, he only wanted to see if Aster could speak the truth without hesitation. He needed someone he could trust. He said he had high expectations for him, because he believed Aster was different. Everyone born in the gray zone had similar lives, almost always destined for failure. But Aster was an exception. Wenji wondered why the leader of such a highly reputed family would place someone from the gray zone at his own son's side. This situation deeply intrigued him. Fortunately, he noticed something different, and decided to investigate further. Aster, curious, asked if the fight with the younger brother had really been the reason for this approach. Wenji explained that it was a good excuse. The guest and his younger brother had fought, and that created the perfect opening, so he, the older brother, could bring the two together to talk. But Aster was still wondering what that man truly wanted. He thought Wenji was avoiding the main topic too much, and not saying what mattered. Finally, Wenji admitted that he understood it was a difficult situation to bring up, but assured him that he was not going through any inner conflict. Still, his demeanor remained enigmatic. Actually, the Blandor family was more united than ever. The problem now was something else. Wenji explained that the real threat came from the Dakulan family, as they were monitoring their every move. And when Aster asked why, Wenji said he himself had already declared that he wouldn't mind dying as long as he could share the truth. That's why he decided to reveal what was going on. Wenji had been secretly researching the celestial origin magic, a forbidden art connected to the Dakulan family. He had discovered something important, perhaps even a secret technique, but upon hearing this, Aster was alarmed. He knew that just investigating this kind of magic was already enough reason to be killed, so he asked why Wenji hadn't simply tried to destroy it. Wenji admitted that it was true, and that if it were discovered that even he, the vice principal of the academy, was involved, he would be executed. At first, his goal really was to destroy the magic, but something changed. He asked if Aster could understand. The celestial origin magic was considered the root of all the Dakulan family's secret arts. It was so perfect that, the deeper he studied it, the more he wanted to improve it rather than destroy it. He became fascinated by the technique's structure, even knowing the danger. Aster thought Wenji was completely insane, but the timeline started to make sense. In his past life, when the Dakulan family destroyed the Blandor family, they had found exactly the results of that research. That was why Farron gathered all his forces to attack the Blandor. From the beginning, he had seen the possibility of a new celestial origin magic emerging. So Aster asked why Wenji was specifically looking for him. Wenji explained that he hadn't shared anything with his own family because he believed there was a spy among them, possibly connected to the material supply route. As soon as he realized the danger he was in, he decided to share part of the research with someone he trusted. He also admitted he didn't want to die for nothing. Aster suggested it might be better to ally with the Decaman, since they would probably welcome Wenji, but Wenji refused the idea. He had his reasons for not accepting that path. Instead, he asked Aster for a favor. He said the research was a collaborative work, but he had reached a dead end on his part. That's why he wanted Aster to deliver part of the research to Professor Perun from Zenionel Academy. As a reward, he would give him the healing light magic, and once the task was completed, he would also deliver a new celestial origin spell. Aster, suspicious, asked why the exchange couldn't be done right there. He thought he could take the healing light magic as a guarantee, since he'd be taking a risk, and if everything went well, he would get the other magic too. Wenji laughed, saying Aster was pretty shameless, but ended up agreeing. He pointed out that since Aster hadn't mastered celestial origin magic yet, the technique wouldn't be useful to him right now. Even so, he accepted the agreement but set a condition. When the thesis was completed, they might need Aster's help and wanted him to stay as a partner until the end. Aster thought that was fair. After all, if it was just about the thesis, he was willing to help. But he quickly joked that he didn't know how to read since he was a beggar. Wenji froze for a second before realizing it was a joke, and Aster still asked if that Professor Perun could really be trusted. Wenji explained that he had known Perun since their student days at the academy. They used to compete for first place all the time, until Wenji returned to Blandor, and the rivalry ended. To Aster, this meant there was another lunatic like Wenji in the academy. Great. Later, Aster began organizing everything he had to deliver. There were many books, notes, and a letter, but that letter was addressed to Aster himself. In it, Wenji explained that he had selected and separated all the essential magical texts for Aster's future. He had also indicated the exact order in which he should study each subject. That was the moment Aster realized it had all been prepared for him. It was an enormous gift. Wenji, despite being crazy, was a true genius. He had laid out a complete learning plan, from basic magic to advanced techniques, and in addition to the healing light magic and celestial origin magic, Aster discovered that he would have around 132 different subjects to study. There was also the issue of the Grimoire, something Aster knew he'd have to discuss directly with Damien. Now that he had the privilege of calling him a friend, he valued Wenji's books even more. Those were not ordinary books. They were true study guides, perfectly organized. Anyone who wanted to learn magic could build a solid foundation using that material. With that in mind, Aster began to rethink the purpose of the tower he wanted to build in the future. Now, it would have a new identity. It would be a place dedicated to knowledge, where those who sought wisdom would find support. A space where books like Wenji's would have their true purpose recognized. Meanwhile, Wenji reflected on how Aster had been an unexpected gain. At first, he thought that if Aster turned out to be useful, he would involve him in the task. If he turned out to be useless, he would discard him without hesitation. But the boy had proven to be much more interesting than expected. Wenji still remembered the look Aster gave when threatened with death. It had been intense and funny at the same time. Aster was different from the others. He hid many things, like everyone does, but there was something special. His eyes were looking in the same direction as Wenji's. After some time, Aster was ready to leave. Lancy walked him to the carriage, which was already waiting. She informed him that both he and Damien wouldn't need to take the entrance exam for the academy. Still, she was proud of them both. They were now officially students of Zenion Academy. academy. She also mentioned that the uniform looked great on him. Aster was surprised by the privilege. No exam? So that was what it meant to belong to a noble family? He realized he was feeling different, maybe even important. Damien, already dressed in the uniform, called his friend happily. The madam in turn wished them well. It was a great opportunity, and she hoped they would achieve the results they had been aiming for. Aster thanked her, but deep inside, his mind was already focused on the future. He was thinking big. After all, they were heading to Zenion, the greatest academy in the West, a place full of sponsors and opportunities. He needed to make the most of them. As they approached the academy, Aster couldn't help but think about how Wenji was truly a genius mage. The foundations of magic Wenji had gathered seemed simple at first glance, but the interpretations changed everything. It was like comparing magic to water. For some, it was rain that brought life. For others, a destructive flood. It all depended on perspective. Each noble house had developed its own view of magic based on those interpretations, and that's when Aster finally noticed the alterations Wenji had made to the celestial origin magic. But he didn't have time to think deeply about it. Damien interrupted him, calling his attention. They had arrived at Zenion Academy. Unfortunately, Lancey couldn't go any further with them. The carriage would stop there, and it was time to say goodbye. She wished them good luck, and Damien, excited, gave an overly dramatic wave. Then he pulled his friend along in a hurry. Damien mentioned that Lancey had warned them that if they arrived too late, there might not be any seats left. Aster found it curious. This wasn't a play, where the early birds got the best seats. But deep down, he understood that the real purpose was to keep Damien from wandering off and getting lost, so he let it go. Shortly after, inside the main auditorium, Damien was completely excited. He said Lancey was right, because if they had taken any longer, there would be no place to sit. It was packed. Aster looked around, analyzing everything carefully. They were in class M3, seats 11 and 12. Damien seemed a bit anxious, and kept insisting they sit quickly. Aster found it interesting to see how excited Damien was, especially considering that in the beginning, he said he didn't want to come to the academy at all. But then, something unexpected happened. Someone bumped into Damien and knocked him over. It seemed intentional, and the one responsible was a much older man. Aster quickly stepped in to help his friend up. Damien, however, didn't seem bothered. He just asked the man to be more careful next time. But the man wouldn't let it go. He angrily asked what had fallen on his clothes. That's when Aster noticed it. Damien had drooled on the man's outfit. Calmly, Damien said he would clean it without a problem. He licked his finger and rubbed it on the stain to clean it. The gesture made the man furious. In the next moment, he tried to attack Damien, but Aster was faster. He grabbed the man's fist firmly and warned him that it would be better to stop right there. The atmosphere turned tense. The man demanded to know who Aster thought he was. But before the argument could escalate, Damien answered simply. He said Aster was his friend, and Aster, with a small smile, confirmed it. That was right. He was Damien's friend. The man looked at Aster and said he was a great friend. After all, few people would be willing to take a punch for someone like that. However, he warned that Aster had chosen the wrong moment to show such loyalty. Aster already knew it would be hard to get along with others on the very first day, so he did not care much. If it had to be settled with punches, fine. But one thing bothered him. Was that guy also a student? Why did he look like a 40-year-old man? Soon, a small crowd started to gather around them. Everyone was watching as if it were the main attraction of the day, a fight between freshmen. But suddenly, someone showed up looking shocked at the scene. He was not there to give a lecture, but to organize the mess. He told the newbies to clear the area and form a circle, calling them idiots while doing it. Then a magic barrier was cast around the two, turning the situation into an improvised arena. Bets started almost immediately. The big guy introduced himself as Exter from the Dahlenpay house, revealing his noble background. Aster, who had no noble lineage, simply replied that he did not care. Exter also said it did not matter to him either, and since he knew a mage would be at a disadvantage in a small space, he let Aster attack first. That made Aster think the guy was kind of funny. After all, the one who had been silent before now would not shut up, and even asked if Exter was scared. That provocation was enough to make Exter charge, but Aster dodged easily. Then he warned that he was not just an ordinary mage. He channeled magic into his fist and landed a powerful punch on Exter, who immediately wondered how that kid's strike could be so strong. Was he really a mage? Meanwhile, Damien was already by his side using healing magic. It looked like a kind gesture, but in truth, it was just to buy more time and let Aster keep hitting non-stop. Each punch landed on Exter with so much force that he could barely defend himself. It was like the two were taking turns, one hitting and the other healing. They looked like complete psychopaths torturing yet another victim in front of the crowd, and Exter, completely terrified, was losing control of the situation. Meanwhile, the audience was cheering wildly, making the scene even more chaotic. Exter, out of his mind, shouted in rage, unable to accept that a mage dared to fight like that. He tried to counter with a well-placed strike, and Aster acknowledged that the move was actually decent. But then Exter decided to use a stronger technique and finally hit Aster in the chest. The hit was strong, but Aster stayed on his feet, admitting he had been hit. Even so, he did not seem hurt, which left Exter in shock. He could not understand how that mage could endure it like that. Damien continued to heal Aster, which forced him to end the fight once and for all, so he decided to use a technique he had developed with his former companions in his past life, a technique involving the collision of magical particles, made to extract energy through mana. It was neither a magical art nor a martial art. It was pure application of technique and science. Then he he executed his special collision strike. The glow of the technique was so intense and powerful that the magical barrier around them shattered. In the next instant, Exter was lying on the ground, defeated. Aster then ordered everyone to applaud and celebrate. The crowd went wild, and Damien declared that they had won. Aster agreed, and one of the mages who had been watching since the beginning muttered something about how vulgar it was for a mage to fight like that. But he did not even have time to say more because one of the teachers appeared, furious, asking who the hell had started a fight on the very first day. Aster figured he was probably in trouble, but since he was just a mercenary, he planned to leave quietly. Except Damien suddenly raised his hand and confessed it was them who started the mess. Aster, in disbelief, could only think that kid was a complete disaster. Meanwhile, Exter was still nearly unconscious on the ground. Later, already in the professor's office, they were told that since they confessed voluntarily, they would not be punished, but they would be closely watched from now on. Luckily, they got back in time. The entrance ceremony had not started yet, but Aster had barely stepped inside, and people were already talking about him, the mage who fought like a martial artist. Damien said they were becoming famous, and Aster, feeling uncomfortable, realized he was practically turning into a celebrity. They soon found their seats, and long after that, the headmaster was still giving his lengthy speech. Damien had already fallen asleep, while Aster noticed how impressive the headmaster was for being able to speak for so long without even sitting down. Not only was Damien sleeping, but he was also drooling in his sleep. Then, at a certain point, a staff member appeared with an urgent message for the headmaster. He apologized to the students and informed them that something important had come up. The headmaster said he would end his speech early, but the ceremony would continue as planned. The next teacher who appeared did not waste any time. She slammed the table and shouted so loudly that it even woke up Damien, which was impressive on its own. She introduced herself as Jaira and said she would take charge of the remainder of the ceremony. The first part would be dedicated to the freshman's oath, starting with the representative of the magic division, Dahlia of Deni. As she walked up to the stage, many students whispered about her fame, as if she were a celebrity. She was the third daughter of the head of the powerful Nye family, considered a rising star and a prodigy in the field of magic. Watching from a distance, Aster thought that if the Deccan family was the most powerful in the East, then the Nye family was in second place. Dahlia had grown up carrying the weight of always being second best, and was preparing to lead the next generation of her house. Even back when Aster was already close to retirement, she had never needed his help. In truth, they never got along. Some would say they were terrible friends, but in reality, it was just a long-standing rivalry. After her, Jaira called the representative of the martial arts division, a student named Paul. Since no last name was mentioned, Aster assumed he was not from a noble family. Once the oath was completed, it was time to introduce the teachers of class 172, and just as Dahlia was stepping down from the stage, she glanced directly at Aster. For some reason, that distracted her so much that she tripped on the step and fell flat on her face. The teachers introduced themselves one by one, some giving long speeches, others being more brief, but Aster was waiting attentively for only one of them. Finally, the professor he wanted to approach appeared, Parun, responsible for the classes on magical principles of magology. At first, Aster thought he might resemble Wenji, but he was completely different. Still, he believed Parun was also wearing a mask, just like Wenji used to. When Jaira announced the end of the ceremony, everyone was instructed to head to their dormitories. Damien, as usual, had fallen asleep again, leaning against a wall. When he was woken up, he asked if everything was already over. Aster said yes, and joked that since he got caught sleeping, they both had been kicked out of the hall and had to return to the dormitory. Damien, startled, did not even know how to react. Later, already in the dorm, Aster thought he did not expect Damien to scream so much over something so small. It had just been an innocent joke. Thanks to his good relationship with Damien, who had important connections, Aster managed to get a room on one of the higher floors of the dormitory. It was a spacious and refined room, with all the materials he would need: notebooks, pens, utensils, and a solid structure. However, his roommate would not be Damien, but rather Paul, the same martial arts representative. When they met, Paul got straight to the point. He said he preferred they did not get involved in each other's business, and that Aster could do whatever he wanted, like staying up late, as long as he did not disturb him. The two stared at each other as if they were about to fight. Aster did not respond immediately. He was curious to see how skilled that guy really was. He took a step forward, as if he were about to attack, and at that very moment, Paul reached for his sword, showing he was ready. Aster recognized that he was not bad at all. Before things could escalate, Damien appeared and called his friend to go out. Aster, unconcerned, said he was going for a walk, and in return, did not want to hear complaints if he made noise after midnight. Later, Damien asked who Aster's new roommate was, but he honestly replied that he had no idea. He said he was too busy to pay attention to that. Damien, excited, suggested walking around the academy, since there were many interesting things to see there. Aster agreed. He knew Zenian Academy was huge, and for that reason, it was important to get familiar with the surroundings. Despite the walk, something was bothering Aster. It had nothing to do with his past life, but his senses were on high alert. He felt that something was wrong. When he looked at the academy rooftops, he noticed the presence of mercenaries working under the Dekulan family, hidden and watching. Still, the group continued their tour. They spent the day exploring the place, and Damien was impressed by absolutely everything he saw. One of the most memorable stops was a large artificial lake in the center of Zenion Academy. Aster thought Damien looked more like a babysitter than a student. He suspected that Lancey had thrown that responsibility on him on purpose. But he also knew that Damien had a peculiar temperament, so he promised himself that one day he would make Lancey pay for that. In the end, he suggested that Damien ask to have a similar lake built at home, since he liked it so much. Damien, still excited about the lake they had visited, said he would build one even deeper than that. Astor, with his usual humor, replied that it was simple, just dig a hole and pour water into it. Somewhere far away, Lancey sneezed without knowing why. When they came across a large magical statue, Astor commented that it would be easy to make one of those too, and even suggested building a dragon statue with large wings. Astor liked the idea and said he wanted one too. Lancey, on the other hand, could not understand why she was getting so many chills that day. Feeling the walk had gone on long enough, Astor said it was time to return to the dormitory. On the way back, he identified 7 mercenaries scattered around the area, and if he counted the ones he could not see, there were probably at least 10. By analyzing their formation, Astor concluded that the target must be the second magic hall, where Professor Parun's laboratory was located. It was clear that either he or the professor himself was being targeted by the Declan family. It was only a matter of time before they made a clearer move. Even so, Astor felt strangely excited about it. He was even wondering why they had not come after him yet. But the moment that thought crossed his mind, the assassins began to act. That night, while one of the intruders was sneaking into the second magic hall, another was already inside waiting. Suddenly, one of them received an urgent message from headquarters. A red alert had been issued, ordering all members to regroup at the nest of the primary target. That meant they had discovered something important. One of the hooded men commented that it was probably a sign that Wenji had begun to move. The new order was clear. Among the various secondary targets, Professor Parun was now the priority for surveillance. Still, a question came up. If high-level professors were there, could they really invade and fight them all? With only regular soldiers, it would be impossible. Someone pointed out that the so-called single digits would not be involved in that mission. None of them would show up. Instead, the fire demon Callahan would participate in the mission. He was known as Callahan, vice captain of the Deculan magical squad, nicknamed the Red Jewel. One of the hooded men, though relieved to know Callahan would be present, felt chills. That man was cruel, capable of doing anything to complete a mission, even sacrificing allies. Everyone there knew they were just pawns. If the mission failed, they would be discarded without hesitation. That is why they agreed that the operation could not turn into an open conflict. If a noble family mage were exposed, it would be a political disaster. While the enemies gathered in secret, Astor was already watching them from afar, hidden on the rooftop of the second magic hall. He knew the mission would begin at midnight, and that Callahan would be present. He was not just an ordinary mage. His name had been etched into history as a war mage. Astor knew he had to defeat him. The arcane fire magic of the Deculan, known as Scalaren magic, was Callahan's specialty, and Astor could not ignore that. He did not quite understand why the mercenaries had shown up so quickly, but in the midst of it all, he made an unexpected discovery. Even so, one doubt remained in his mind. Wenji's thesis was in his hands, so why were the mercenaries saying it would be delivered to a secondary target like Professor Parun? If the thesis he held was genuine, then the one being delivered must be a fake. That meant the real goal of the enemies was not just the thesis but something beyond it. With that in mind, Astor decided to stay alert. That same night, still in the dormitory, Paul was getting ready. When he looked to the side, he thought Astor was asleep. Taking advantage of the moment, he left quietly. But he was mistaken. The Astor lying on the bed was not real. It was only a disguised dummy. The real Astor was already on the move. Paul went to Professor Parun's laboratory, where Parun was already aware of the Deculan mercenaries' movements. They had invaded his territory with confidence, but that did not intimidate him. When Paul arrived, Parun commented that he still needed to improve his ether refinement. That was the foundation for mastering stealth and concealment arts, something essential. Then Paul handed Parun Wenji's thesis, completing the first stage of his mission. Parun thought Wenji had tried to deliver the thesis discreetly, avoiding the eyes of the Dakin family, but had still been captured. However, something did not make sense. He knew that cunning fox well, and understood that Wenji would not be caught so easily. There had to be a trick behind it. At that moment, a great explosion occurred inside Parun's office. Right after, a man stepped in through the smoke with a cynical smile. He said it was a pleasure to meet him. His name was Callahan, and he asked if this was the professor who liked to lock himself inside his laboratory. While Paul panicked at the sudden attack, Parun remained completely calm. Callahan, noticing the young man's reaction, remarked that the mercenary seemed to recognize him, but he wanted to know if the professor did as well. Parun, impatient, replied that he had never heard of him, and asked him to get to the point, since the stench he carried was ruining his nose and his office. Callahan found that amusing, and said very well, he would get straight to it. The boy would die, and the professor could be dismembered along with him. Then he cast a flaming spell with full force. The attack, however, was blocked by an ice spell cast by Parun. It was fire against ice, and the clash between the two elements lit up the laboratory. Parun then turned to Paul and said that from that moment on, he would no longer treat him as a student, but as a mercenary. He had to fight to protect his own life. Then he noticed something serious. No alarm had gone off in the academy. That meant the Deculan were using concealment magic. At that instant, the only person he could rely on was the novice mercenary in front of him. Callahan, mocking, commented that the envelope really looked like it had come from Blandor's trash, and if they were not willing to hand over over the thesis peacefully, then they could at least have some fun. He then unleashed another fiery spell, creating a series of explosions and bursts of ice. While Paul struggled to defend himself, Haroon counterattacked with increasingly powerful ice spells. The impact of the magic was so strong that the entire office turned into burning ruins. From above, Aster was watching everything and realized the situation was becoming serious. He put on his mask. At that moment, he was no longer just Aster, but the single-digit mercenary, number 1. He asked for the moon's blessing to guide his steps, hoping to be a good mercenary once more. Although, to be honest, he was not sure he had ever truly been good at it. Meanwhile, Callahan praised Paul's performance, saying he was not doing badly, but Paul was completely desperate. He was only still alive because the artifact Paran had given him was a protective talisman. In the middle of the battle, Paran appeared, telling Paul to move aside, and unleashed a powerful ice ray that managed to block another of Callahan's attacks. He then praised Paul's effort, saying he was doing well, and advised him to trust himself more. He enchanted Paul's sword with ether power, and asked if he could keep blocking the strikes. Paul answered that he could, that he would endure as long as necessary. Callahan observed and commented that they made a fine pair. The mage and the warrior were cooperating well. In response, he kept launching increasingly destructive fireballs. Haroon noticed that Paul was too busy defending against Callahan's spells, but he still had to deal with the other Dakulan mercenaries approaching from behind. If the fight continued at that pace, the outcome would be bad for both of them. So Haroon decided to play his final card. When the problem lies in spells and mana consumption, a battle for magical territory control begins, and he was curious to see how long Callahan would last. He changed his approach, abandoning elemental spells and starting to use pure magic. Callahan, seeing this, understood that the professor wanted a contest of raw power. He accepted the challenge with a smile. The two began to clash with pure magical energy against each other, creating an explosion so intense that even Paul, who had stepped back, was hit by the shockwave. At that moment, he realized clearly that the two fighters in front of him were true monsters. There was no room for him to act, no openings to counterattack. He simply could no longer keep up with the pace of the battle. Outside, a gigantic storm had formed. It was practically a magical cyclone swallowing the entire academy from the inside out. The other mercenaries from the Dakulan family, who were trying to invade the place, quickly realized that entering would be suicide. The magical energy being released was terrifying, and while they were still counting how many soldiers they had left, they were surprised by one of them, a hooded figure who had already been waiting. And of course, the one who had gotten past all the mercenaries and approached Callahan with ease was Aster. He appeared suddenly, confident, as if he were just having fun, and made sure to announce his arrival in theatrical fashion, showcasing his entrance like a stage performance. Callahan, surprised and irritated, could not tell if the boy was taking things seriously, but had no time to think. Aster grabbed him by the neck and declared that this place would be his grave. With no alternative, Callahan retaliated with a point-blank magical explosion in an attempt to escape. The impact was strong, but it had a severe side effect. The sudden shift of mana inside his own body caused him to cough up blood. In that state, Callahan could no longer channel magical energy for a few seconds, leaving him completely vulnerable. And Aster, of course, would give no chance for recovery. Other mercenaries from the Dakulan family soon appeared to help, trying to protect him. Meanwhile, Callahan managed to use a potion to stabilize his mana flow, but was shocked to see the power of that masked man. Alone, Aster was taking down all the other mercenaries mid-air with terrifying efficiency. His movements were precise, calculated, without any waste. It was surgical combat execution. Callahan, watching all of it, decided he could no longer hold back. He summoned all the firepower he had left and declared that, even without knowing who that man was, he had to die there. The next flame blast was so powerful that it burned even the Dakulan allies, all to hit Aster with full force. The explosion was so violent that it created a crater, and Callahan, seeing it, believed the masked man was finally dead. He did not care about the sacrificed mercenaries. The most important thing was completing his mission. While taking another booster potion, he tried to regain his composure, telling himself that losing control did not suit him. That was when a voice interrupted, asking if that was all he had. Callahan, on the outside, might seem like a lunatic, but on the inside he was cold, calculating, as cunning as a serpent. From the beginning, he had planned to kill all the other mercenaries along with Aster, and now the scene was simply the result of that strategy. But Aster had not been defeated. He was already prepared to deliver the final blow, and precisely blast Callahan's head. He said that cold-heartedness would be the reason for his death. The magical shot he fired was condensed, direct, and so fast that it pierced Callahan's head like a sniper bullet, leaving a clean hole in his forehead. The body collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Even so, Aster was exhausted. It was to be expected, since fighting someone like Callahan was no easy task. Any other mage would have been eliminated in that ambush. Callahan's final spell, though deadly, ended up being his own undoing. If he had joined forces with the mercenaries instead of sacrificing them, he might have had a chance. Aster, worn out and with dangerously low mana levels, approached Callahan's body to search through his belongings. He knew what he was looking for. Most battle mages do not trust anyone, so they carry their own grimoires. And there, as expected, he found a bag with subspace. He took it for himself and stored the artifact with ease. At that moment, Haroon appeared among the rubble. Aster, still out of breath, said the professor was late. Haroon, with his sarcastic tone, replied replied that he had been busy dealing with some rats, and more importantly, he wanted to know if Aster was one of them too. Tired of the insinuation, Aster said he had just dealt with that lunatic over there, and asked if the professor still thought he was the enemy. Parun, now calmer, replied that maybe Aster was Wenji's messenger, and wanted to know who the hell the other mercenary with him was. He also asked if the research would now be divided into 2 parts. Aster, already more relaxed, concluded that the other guy had probably brought a fake version of the thesis. Most likely, all of this had been planned by Wenji. He used a decoy to draw in the curious, perhaps as a way to justify increased security in the Academy City while simultaneously controlling the influence of the Decalin family. Even with the concealment barrier, the battle had been too flashy, so Aster found it strange that the Imperial Knights had not shown up yet, unless that too was part of Wenji's plan. In the end, the Decalin family was exposed, and Aster, who was the real messenger, delivered the thesis as agreed. Professor Parun asked if he knew the content of the document, and Aster replied that he did. He said he had no problem fighting, but asked if the professor really wanted to give up a strong ally. Parun affirmed that the papers were safe, and acknowledged that Aster had done a good job. That settled the matter. Even so, Parun mentioned that his acquaintance, Andy, was only interested in people with well-defined desires, those with ambitions that aligned with his own goals. That was why he naturally assumed Aster also wanted something in return. And he was right. Aster revealed that he wanted a book. His plan was to build a large and majestic tower where he would place all the books he could find, allowing anyone to read them. That was why he wanted a book written by Parun, someone with a unique view of arcane sciences. Parun thought the idea of writing a book was amusing, and started to seriously consider it. Then he asked how they could stay in contact. He assumed Aster would return again to deliver another document, but Aster replied with indifference, making it clear he had no interest in forming personal bonds. Still, he handed over a communication crystal made of 2 connected spheres. If one were broken, the other would also shatter. He explained that if Parun wanted to talk to him, he just had to break one sphere, and if he were in danger, he should break both. That way, there would be no need to go looking for him. But before Parun could reply, Aster had already vanished. Shortly after, the Imperial Knights arrived at the scene, isolated the area, and temporarily evacuated the Academy students to prevent further incidents. Aster, as always, took advantage of the commotion to blend in with the students and disappear from the authorities' sight. Thinking it through, everything pointed to the Decalin family being truly responsible for what had happened. Because of that, they would likely remain quiet for a long time. During the previous battle, Aster had also noticed something strange. The seal on his chest had reacted differently. Normally, it never responded, but when he blocked Karen's magic, Aster felt a power resonating along with the barrier, which ended up helping suppress the counterattack. He still could not fully explain it, but it seemed like a kind of magical rejection, an elemental technique used by mages to prevent the caster from being harmed by their own magic. Even without fully understanding it, he decided to investigate the matter later. As he walked, a boy named Chenbi approached, asking if he was good at fighting, and if he was the same one who had started that fight. Aster wondered if the boy had seen him fighting that night. If he had, maybe Aster would have to silence him. However, Chenbi was just impressed by the fight on the first day, when Aster faced a martial artist, and said that scene had been quite impressive. Aster responded coldly, saying the opponent had just been a weakling. As Aster turned his back to leave, Chenbi said he just wanted to be near him. He confessed that he had not made any friends yet, and found it hard to fit in. Aster understood perfectly. The Academy promised equality for everyone, regardless of origin, but that was a promise made by the institution, not by the students themselves. Even so, he replied that it was fine, and that he did not expect anything bad from Chenbi. The boy sincerely thanked him. Chenbi commented that rumors spread very quickly in that place. A bad reputation could arise overnight. Despite that, Aster was having a peaceful conversation with someone, and that was rare in his life. Until that moment, Aster had only met lunatics or eccentric people wherever he went. He had almost forgotten what it was like to be around someone normal. Now, at last, he was about to begin his true academic life. The next morning, during their first official class, Damien was still feeling sleepy when Chenbi approached to form a trio. He casually remarked that it was surprising how classes were resuming so soon after the chaos of the previous day. In his opinion, they at least deserved a break. Aster, observing everything, thought that based on their earlier conversation, Chenbi probably did not come from a noble family and did not seem to have much money. Even so, he was cheerful, showed no shyness, and seemed like a decent person. Chenbi himself commented that on the way to class, he had found out who their teacher would be. It was Miss Jaira, who was famous for having fought off an entire order of trolls on her own and won. Shortly after Jaira arrived, Aster recognized her from the entrance ceremony, although he had not known her name until then, since he had not paid much attention at the time. The teacher began the class by explaining that there had been a minor disturbance the previous day, but that it should not be a cause for concern. From that point on, the focus should be on learning. Before beginning the lesson content, Jaira explained that she needed to measure the mana of each student. This measurement would assess both the quantity and the quality of each person's magical energy. She then asked the class what they thought was more important, the quantity or the quality of mana. A student named Arjun raised her hand and answered that for those who already had a certain amount of mana, the quality would be more relevant. In a clash between mages of the same level, the quality of mana would determine the winner. Aster silently agreed. That was the answer found in books. Mana quality influenced the precision, stability, and power of spells. Even with a large amount of mana, it would be useless if it could not hit the target properly. Jaira then asked where Arjun was from, and the student replied that she came from the barony of Pelan. The teacher commented that it made sense, and Luna, one of the students, looked visibly shaken by that. Jaira asked if anyone else would like to try answering. Since no one volunteered, the teacher randomly pointed at another student. The chosen one said that maybe mana quantity was more important, because in large-scale battles, those with more mana could cast more spells. Aster considered that perspective valid. In certain situations, both quantity and quality could be essential, depending on the type of combat. Even so, Jaira made a disapproving expression. Then all the other students began offering their own answers, but none seemed to satisfy the teacher. In the end, Jaira said she had listened carefully to all of them. She said those answers were close to the truth, but none were truly correct. While she spoke, one student was still quietly crying. The teacher asked everyone to reflect on what they had said. She wanted to know if they had answered based on something they truly believed, or if they had only said what they thought she wanted to hear. According to Jaira, a mage must never lose their own conviction. Regardless of the place or situation, one should not act based on others' opinions. A true mage needs willpower and resolve until the end. To her, that was the mindset of a mage. From that moment on, everyone there would begin the path to becoming true mages. That was the message she wanted to pass on to each of them. Aster thought that her approach was excellent. In the end, he had been right about her. The teacher had an eccentric style, maybe even a little crazy, but she used it to teach deep and important lessons. Right after, Jaira announced that Arjun would be the representative of Class M3 from the Magic Division. Her answer had been the most impressive, and because of that, she would be responsible for recording the mana levels of the other students. Arjun was very excited, and happily stepped down to fulfill her new role. Aster watched everything carefully, and concluded that this was exactly how people were trained. That teacher was, without a doubt, cruel, but extremely effective. Shenbi commented that he was really jealous of everything going on. Soon after, the assistant teacher approached with the device used to measure the students' mana. Professor Jaira explained that most of them probably had never seen such an instrument. She said it was time to find out the mana level of each of them. Maybe there was a genius among the students. Maybe even a true monster was hiding in their midst. Everyone was impressed when they saw that Jaira herself had a mana level of 9/67. After that, the assistant teacher explained that the device was quite simple to use and asked Miss Argan to give a demonstration. All she had to do was touch the sphere and focus her magical energy. As soon as Argan touched the artifact, magical gears activated inside the sphere, revealing that her mana quality was at level 4. Jaira explained that the central number represented the quality of mana, which could range from 1 to 10. Argan's level 4, considering she was just a freshman, was quite impressive. The previous year, the average had been only 3. Argan was extremely excited with the result. Next, Jaira announced that she would also measure Argan's mana quantity. The process was the same. Mana quantity could go up to level 100. Argan reached 17, which was above the average of 15, so she was above expectations in that area as well. The teacher congratulated her, saying she seemed to be an excellent mage. Shenbi, watching everything with excitement, commented that he hoped to get a high result too. Aster, on the other hand, thought the teacher was training Arjun in an exemplary way. She already seemed to be becoming a dedicated follower of that strict teaching style. After that, Jaira passed the responsibility for the next tests to the class representative and the assistant teacher, as she needed to take care of other matters. Shenbi was visibly excited to test his own mana, while Aster waited calmly and Damien was still dozing off. Then the class's attention turned to a student who had obtained a surprising result. Her mana was recorded as 6/20, meaning 6 in quality and 20 in quantity. It was Furion of Denai, Dahlia's sister. Aster noticed that her hair was slightly different, and concluded she probably came from a collateral bloodline. The assistant teacher commented that, as expected from a noble descendant, her results were excellent. Although her mana quantity was slightly lower than her quality, that was not a weakness. With enough training, it could easily be compensated. The commotion woke Damien, who, still sleepy, asked what was going on. Aster explained that they were measuring the student's mana, and suggested that he take the test too. Damien, suddenly excited, said he really wanted to participate. He could barely speak from so much excitement, repeating several times that he wanted to be measured. Aster, confused, wondered why that boy acted like that. As the three of them approached the sphere, many students were amazed. Everyone knew Damien, heir of the Blander family, and they were also talking about Aster, known for having beaten up an entire group of students. As for Chenbi, nobody knew who he was. Aster thought to himself that it was not exactly a proud achievement to be known for beating up another kid, but in any case, Damien was the first to try. When he channeled his mana into the device, the result shocked everyone. The number revealed was exactly the same as Professor Jaira's, 9/67. The assistant teacher was so surprised he thought the device must be malfunctioning. Aster believed that was the usual reaction when people faced a true genius. It was like an unscalable wall rising before their eyes, something impossible to surpass or even comprehend. Damien, curious, asked if that number was considered high. Aster already knew from the beginning that Damien was a genius. Now he understood even better why the so-called monster of Blandor was so powerful. Damien had simply been born that way. In his past life, if Damien had truly dedicated dedicated himself, he could have changed the fate of the entire continent. But this time, things would be different. Lander would become a colossal obstacle to the Dekulin and would lead Damien to surpass all common limits. The assistant teacher acknowledged that Damien was truly worthy of the name he carried. It was an impressive result, but he warned him not to be consumed by ambition. Damien simply replied with a fine. After the mana test began, someone asked if Aster had already done his. If not, he would be next. Aster realized that everyone was curious about his mana level, especially because they wanted to compare it to Damien's. To avoid drawing too much attention, he decided to adjust his energy and hide a bit of his true power. He did not want to stand out too much. But when he touched the device, he realized too late that the limiter was set too low. The amount of mana released was far beyond what he expected. The number shot past 10 and continued climbing beyond 40. The device kept escalating the level without stopping until it eventually crashed with an error for exceeding the supported limit. Damien thought it was amazing. Aster, on the other hand, realized this was bad. The device had simply stopped working. The professor suggested getting another device to redo the test, but Damien insisted it was accurate, that the result was real. Internally, all Aster could think was how badly he wanted him to shut up. The professor restarted the device and asked Aster to try again. This time, Aster controlled his mana more carefully. The new result was modest, 3 by 15, a standard discrete number, but Damien, still suspicious, commented that it was nonsense, a very bad word. Aster, surprised, wondered since when Damien used that kind of language. Damien explained that a friend had taught him. He said that when something seemed like a big lie, people usually use that expression. Aster grew concerned. He realized he would now have to be more careful about what he said around the boy. He could not just say anything anymore. Meanwhile, in the first department of magic, Professor Jira was noting that the renovation of the second department was going well. She was reflecting on the recent incidents involving Decolan, the mage named Callahan, and also Perrin, who was once a famous name in the past. She believed she could handle the situation, although she did not consider it her direct responsibility. That was when the assistant teacher arrived, bringing the mana test results. As she had suspected, most students had average results. The only one who exceeded the normal limits was Damien, which came as no surprise. After all, he came from a noble family and had natural talent. But what truly caught her attention was Aster's result. His first reading had triggered a code for exceeding the limit. That alone was enough to spark the professor's interest. She decided that from now on, she would observe that boy more closely. Back in class, Aster was already scolding Damien for repeating bad words. He said it was not a nice thing to say, and he added that the expression was his in the first place. Later, they were facing a mana dragon. Damien asked his friend if it looked good, and Aster replied that it did, that it was fine. In reality, it was just a miniature mana dragon, a figurine. Damien commented that it would be called Blood, Sweat, and Tears number 2. Aster suggested making it more dynamic, opening the wings and posing it as if it were about to lunge forward with its mouth open, like that statue from his home, but even more impactful. While Damien shaped the mana, Shenbi was terrified, thinking he was making it look too easy. He compared it to the great Furion, who could only manipulate a spiritual body, while this guy did it almost with his eyes closed. To him, the world felt too vast, and he was nothing in comparison. Aster noticed his sad expression and simply thought there wasn't much to do other than accept reality. Damien then told his friend that the day had been very fun and that coming to the academy had been the right choice. Aster just smiled and said it was good to hear that. Later, Aster decided to focus on his own training. Holding Callahan's special sealed bag, he knew that with good magical fundamentals and enough magical perception, it would be possible to break any mana pattern. He thought that with the right tools, he would have finished it in under a week, but since he had to hide in a room, it took a full month. Even so, he hadn't wasted that time. He had already transformed the elixir he received from Blandor into mana and absorbed it, as well as gained a lot of new knowledge from the academy. When he finally opened the bag, he found several potions, a gigantic cloak he judged impossible to use, and a defensive artifact with a strong protection level. At the bottom of the bag, he discovered the Dekula's secret grimoire, called Crimson Flames, a magic inferior to Farron's flames but still capable of burning even force fields, although it required real mastery to properly use, something that couldn't be learned quickly. He decided he would proceed at his own pace. At that moment, he remembered it was the day of the Academy's semester performance evaluation. Later, everyone was gathered on campus. Damien was excited, while Aster just complained that there were too many people. Shenbi explained that all M1 classes were there, and mentioned rumors that the evaluation might involve advancing through the canyon, since staff had spoken about repairs in the area. Aster analyzed everything, and recalled that the evaluation had 3 types of practical tests: the challenge corridor, a sewer-like labyrinth where one had to reach the goal; the canyon advance, a race to the finish line; and the simulator, where students dueled against people or monsters. He didn't care much which one it would be, he just wanted to pass without trouble. Shenbi, however, kept trying to predict everything until someone asked for silence. Professor Perun, responsible for the M1 class of the magical department, introduced himself and said he would oversee the evaluation. Aster noticed he looked more tired than before, with deeper eye bags. The professor confirmed it was the semester evaluation day and announced that the chosen test would be the challenge corridor. When Shenbi heard that, he panicked, saying his plan had been ruined, while Damien even called him a liar. The professor professor explained the rules, asking everyone to line up by class. He said the corridor was simple. Just cross the labyrinth to the final gate, since any path would lead to the objective. Shenbi thought it sounded too easy, but the professor explained that, to prevent it from becoming a simple race, golems were spread throughout the paths as part of the evaluation. He added that the golems were slow and clumsy, but dangerous for the students' current level, since they would attack in tight spaces, and could quickly catch up to them. This made the students start murmuring in concern. Professor Perun watched everything in silence, thinking that magicians lacked composure, but recognizing that some had potential, such as Firion, who despite being nervous had strong determination, and Argan, who had lively eyes. Damien, on the other hand, seemed completely detached, as if he wasn't thinking about anything at all. He then ended the announcement by asking for silence, and all the students quieted down, waiting for the test to begin. He explained that the golems would act only as guardians at intersections, and that participants could choose whether to face or avoid them. Each student was also given an evaluation bracelet, with a defensive barrier similar to a magical shield, and if that barrier was broken, the participant would be automatically disqualified, and the golems would ignore them. Then, the examiner added that since many seemed unmotivated, there would be an extra suggestion encouraging everyone to impress in some way, since it didn't matter to arrive first or defeat the most opponents, but rather to demonstrate something memorable, which could earn a reward. In that context, Aster became more interested in the situation. He remembered that Rapitor was the largest library on the eastern continent, divided into 3 levels, upper, intermediate, and lower, and that at the moment he could only access the lower level. When he had previously searched for clues about the magic book, he found nothing on that floor, meaning that if he wanted to continue his investigation, he would need to reach at least the intermediate level. However, access was restricted to royalty, high nobility, and prestigious houses, and could only be bypassed with recommendations from at least 3 professors. With that in mind, Aster realized he needed Parun's reward to obtain such recommendations, and he also memorized the entire cross-session diagram. Parun then informed them that everyone would have time to prepare and collect supplies from the assistant professors, which immediately caused confusion among the students, who began surrounding the assistants, asking for various items such as firestones, flower bombs, and other resources. One student even tried to request a golem control device, but the request was denied as it was prohibited. To Aster, it looked like complete chaos, to the point where he couldn't even distinguish who was a mage and who was just acting out of self-interest. Amid all this, Damien only requested a large number of vine seeds, explaining that he did not have a main magical element and could use plant magic, which he demonstrated by making a sprout appear in front of the professor, earning approval. Shenbi, watching everything, looked visibly nervous, while Aster noticed that even Damien, who seemed carefree, was preparing seriously. After that, everyone was informed that they would start from different points in the labyrinth, each from a numbered portal. Aster was assigned to portal number 3, along with a group of 6 unknown people. Before the start, a group led by Dibe approached him and made a business proposal, offering 30 gold coins for each eliminated opponent bracelet, initially totaling 90 coins for the 3 remaining targets. Aster considered the amount high by common standards, equivalent to a commoner family's monthly salary, while Dibe maintained an arrogant posture while justifying the offer. The negotiation continued with successive increases to 35 and then 40 coins per bracelet, but Aster kept questioning the logic of the calculations, which irritated the group. The discussion eventually revealed the dissatisfaction of Dibe's allies, who tried to belittle Aster for being a commoner, while also praising the status of their family and ancient titles. Even so, Dibe interrupted the conflict and paid part of the agreed amount, ending the negotiation coldly and making it clear that there could be future consequences. Shortly after, everyone prepared to begin the evaluation, while Parun once again reinforced the bracelet rules, explaining that it detected direct attacks and magic infused with mana, and that if the barrier was destroyed, the participant would be removed from the site without being harmed. With everything ready, the portals were activated by the assistants, and the students were teleported into the labyrinth, officially starting the evaluation. However, right at the beginning, there was interference in one of the monitoring screens, which ended up freezing, and Parun ordered them to check the magic eye, being informed that the issue was coming from the 3rd starting point. At that same moment, Aster concentrated mana into a sphere and interfered with the external vision, preventing them from observing what was happening inside. Meanwhile, Dibe and his group were already prepared to attack him with fire magic, but Aster reacted quickly, using his agility and mana reinforcement in his body to avoid the strike and move forward with a direct kick against the first opponent in front of him. Dibe fell with his shoulder nearly broken after the impact of Aster's kick, which avoided any disqualification by using pure martial arts, without enough energy to trigger the bracelet automatically. After that, Aster advanced without hesitation and took down all the opponents with punches, kicks to the mouth, and direct strikes, using everything he knew about hand-to-hand combat. In the middle of the fight, he realized it was strangely satisfying to solve everything that way, and when he finished, everyone was on the ground. With all of them defeated, he provocatively commented that the young master must be full of money now, since he would have to pay an even higher fee than before. Dibe, with a swollen face, cursed him after what happened, but Aster simply replied that he didn't care, and cast a direct spell to his face, eliminating him from the evaluation. After that, he reflected that without Dibe, controlling his power would be slightly more complicated, so he needed to make sure there was no reversal between victim and aggressor, since in his view he was the true victim in the situation. After that, Aster collected 6 bracelets, both from D-Bay and from the group members and students who had been dragged into the conflict. Now, he still needed 3 recommendations to reach his goals, in addition to Parun's reward, which meant he would have to find 2 more people willing to recommend him. Sitting in the middle of the labyrinth, he began thinking of ways to impress the professors, even considering destroying the challenge corridor, but quickly discarded the idea when he remembered there were 4 pillars supporting the structure and that it would cause the ceiling to collapse, leading to his disqualification. Unable to find an immediate solution, he simply kept walking while wondering how his companions were doing. At Damien von Blandor's portal entry point, the situation was chaotic. Several students desperately begged him to stop, fearing disqualification, but Damien von Blandor used magical vines to control a golem and prevent any progress, keeping everyone trapped. The golem was practically indestructible, and the other mages did not understand how he was manipulating it like that. When one of the students fell and almost got crushed, panic increased even more. Meanwhile, Chenbi was in an even worse situation, being attacked by 2 powerful female mages. He tried to hide behind a wall, saying he just wanted to pass the evaluation, but they demanded his bracelet in exchange for stopping the attacks. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction between the two, he managed to escape, but while running he noticed something strange about his bracelet and believed he had been hit by a spell without realizing it, thinking he would be disqualified. He sat down, waiting for elimination, but nothing happened. Suddenly, a sinister message was broadcast throughout the entire labyrinth, greeting the scholars of the academy. Chenbi immediately felt that the voice did not belong to the academy. The voice stated that some had already understood the situation, and that this was punishment for having angered a powerful being, making it clear that everyone there would die and there was no escape. Panic spread, and even Damien von Blandor hesitated for a moment upon hearing it. Behind the scenes, the assistants fell into panic, while Parun stood up and ordered everyone not to panic, telling them to find the professors, especially Professor Felina, as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, chaos spread across the academy. Meanwhile, Aster continued advancing, and was already tired of facing so many golems, which seemed to keep appearing endlessly and were now faster and more precise than normal. He realized that they were all being controlled by an unknown presence, and remembered the voice that had echoed through the test field. About 10 minutes had already passed since the interference began, and the golems, which were supposed to be slow and predictable, were now moving with agility and precision, heading straight toward the students. To Aster, this meant that someone had taken control of the system. Without much patience, he decided he would face whoever was behind it. Meanwhile, Chenbi was walking through a dark corridor, thinking he should have given up earlier. On the way, he encountered Aster, who ran past him being chased by an army of golems and simply told him to run as well. Frightened, Chenbi immediately obeyed. Aster noticed that the mana signature was not Damien von Blandor's, which meant the situation was even more complicated than it seemed, and he decided to change his plan. Aster asked for Chenbi's bracelet and quickly explained that a golem's detection range wasn't that large. If they were being pursued with such precision, it was because the bracelets were connected to the control system, functioning as trackers. Chenbi then asked what would happen to him, and Aster replied that he had already been marked as a target, so the best he could do was attract the golems and buy time for the others to survive. He also told Chenbi to meet Damien von Blandor as soon as possible, telling him to run and survive, since he still had a family waiting for him. While running, Chenbi remembered his family's words, which always encouraged him to focus on magic and never bow his head. Even so, he said it was frustrating, but wished Aster would also survive so they could meet again. Aster took the bracelet and simply replied that it was fine. Chenbi kept running, thinking he had no other choice. He remembered that his parents had sacrificed a lot for him, even buying magic books instead of food, and that his younger sister had even dropped out of school because of it. He believed he needed to survive to repay all of that, but at the same time wondered if he was truly worthy of such effort, since he saw himself as weak, indecisive, and even capable of abandoning a companion. Still, he decided not to give up. Driven by this, Chenbi recited the spell his master had left him, the one that awakened his talent, using all his mana and even causing blood to leak from his nose. He created a gigantic earth lance, a high penetration spell like a cavalry charge, and shouted for Aster to get out of the way. The lance tore through the corridor, destroying everything in its path and piercing and disintegrating several golems. Aster, while dodging, realized it wasn't just simple rock manipulation, but an advanced alteration of the properties of matter, something extremely difficult to maintain. Seeing the result, he mentally noted that it was an impressive technique, but also realized Chenbi wouldn't be able to sustain it for long. Shortly after, Chenbi coughed blood and collapsed from exhaustion, being caught by Aster, who heard him say that the spell had been left by his master and was something grand. Aster replied that it wasn't that grand, but still had value, since the greatness of a spell depended on the user. Chenbi was already nearly unconscious when Aster forced a potion into his mouth, telling him not to act like he was dying. Choking, Chenbi cursed him, while Aster thought about what to do with him next, since he couldn't carry him nor leave him alone. Feeling a strange flow of mana coming from a nearby fork in the path, Aster realized it wasn't natural and told Chenbi to take another route with the other students, saying he would handle something alone. He then followed the mana flow to the center of the labyrinth, where he found a demonic portal. Upon sensing the energy, he immediately recognized recognized it as familiar and dangerous. Ancient demonic energy. From the portal, humanoid creatures made of blood and shadows began to emerge. Demonic beasts similar to those that had once terrorized the continent in the past. Meanwhile, in a control room, Friesen watched everything with satisfaction, stating that the experiment had been a success and that the demon realm had finally fully manifested thanks to an ancient artifact. He commented to others involved that the academy and the responsible professor would fall because of this. A man in incomplete armor reinforced that the objective was to destroy Xenion Academy and everything it protected, and that certain families involved should not be spoken of. Friesen simply accepted this, but internally showed contempt, believing those allies were nothing more than disposable pieces until the plan was complete. He explained that the creation of the demon realm was part of a cult's wish, and that soon he would receive support from the Forbidden Magic Society. Meanwhile, he noticed a student had entered the test field and decided to observe what would happen. He said it would be a good opportunity to see how a human would react to excessive demonic energy, since they could go mad or die immediately, although mana users might suffer beastification. The student in question was Aster, who advanced calmly even while surrounded. To the observer's surprise, he was smiling while facing the creatures and seemed to be waiting for something. Then Aster revealed several test bracelets and began fighting the beasts directly, defeating them with rapid strikes. However, he wasn't just destroying the creatures, he was attaching the bracelets to them. With that, the control system was reversed, causing the golems and creatures to stop attacking him and instead turn on each other, plunging into internal conflict as chaos spread through the labyrinth. Friesen panicked, thinking the boy already knew everything, and at the same time realized he was too fast. While advancing, he ordered that Aster be stopped immediately. Aster cut through all enemies like lightning and invaded the control room, demolishing the first wall, then said it had been a while, Friesen, and that they had finally met again. Meanwhile, Chenbi met up with Damien, but was a bit startled because Damien was controlling several golems at once. Damien explained that he was protecting his friends, and said those golems were like brains, 1, 2, and 3. Chenbi replied that it was interesting, and wondered if golems could be used like that. Dahlia asked how Chenbi had managed to get there alone, and he replied that it was thanks to the bracelet, also realizing that the others still hadn't thrown theirs away. He told everyone to discard them immediately because the golems were tracking them through the devices. One of the students objected, saying it was a test site and implying Chenbi just wanted to steal everyone's bracelets, but he denied it and explained that the bracelets were meaningless and linked to the control system as trackers. The student asked how he had figured that out, and Chenbi said it was Aster who noticed it. The student then mocked him, saying it had to be Aster, and accused him of being deceived by someone from the gray zone, throwing his own bracelet away, and now trying to influence the others because he didn't want to fall alone. Chenbi thought the guy didn't know anything, since Aster really had helped. Damien then remembered that when he first met Aster, he asked what he had, and without hesitation Aster replied that he had a friend, saying he trusted him because he was his friend. He also threw his bracelet away, and told them to take it if they wanted, even calling Chenbi to come along, which left Chenbi impressed because he had never seen Damien act like that before. Meanwhile, Aster finally confronted Friesen, saying that once he had even gone to the demon realm just to kill him and didn't expect to find him there. Friesen replied that he was a lunatic, and said he didn't even know him, asking what he was doing and stating that he would not help him. A large man asked if he was sure this was their first time meeting, but Friesen insisted it was, that he had never seen that man before. The man, bound in chains, restrained by the chains of his own scythe, stated that he would eliminate the boy interfering with the contract, and that he needed to kill him without leaving traces. At that moment, Aster recognized the magic being used, realizing it was the secret wind technique of the Weimar family, a prestigious family known for speed and piercing power. He understood that the man was the family's rejected child, a dog trained as a hunting weapon on the front lines. Aster then asked why a Weimar dog was with someone like Friesen, and the man asked how he knew that. Aster instead asked why they were cooperating, and the man grew angry, saying he was insane. He swung his scythe at Aster, but Aster moved forward into the attack, slipped under the chains, and kept asking what he was doing with someone like Friesen. The man pulled his scythes back using his magic, a move that should have split Aster in half, but Aster continued moving easily, passing through the attack and saying he was too stressed. He dodged between the two returning scythes and even grabbed the chains, stating that dogs get anxious when they hear repetitive sounds. The man angrily replied that he was being treated like a real dog, and Aster confirmed that he was exactly that. Then Aster threw both scythes directly into the Weimar man's stomach, while Friesen panicked and asked what he was doing. The impact was even worse, because Aster used a mana collision against the scythes, making the man cough blood behind his mask. Now Friesen was alone and defenseless, and Aster said only the two of them were left. Friesen tried to provoke him, saying he was just a boy using a magical device, but before he could finish, his left arm was ripped off by a scythe. He screamed asking who Aster was and told him not to come closer, reminding him that the demon realm still existed, and that if he died it couldn't be stopped and his friends would all die. Aster simply responded, "So what?" saying he would wait for the demon realm to devour everyone if necessary, but Friesen would be next. He said Friesen could laugh as much as he wanted, because he wouldn't have that chance much longer. Friesen realized the boy was truly insane, understanding that it wasn't just demon energy but an entire realm at stake, yet he still showed no concern for his friends, which made Friesen wonder if he was even human. He then warned that only he could stop the demon realm, and that within 5 minutes everyone would be dead. Astor replied that he already knew that, and said the reason he didn't care was simple. While tearing the artifact from Friesen's hand, putting on the glove and understanding that it was through that artifact he controlled the demonic power. Then he remembered the mana sphere and absorbed all the power, wondering how he could have forgotten that. Astor remembered that Friesen was the one who taught the young master forbidden magic, and that he only survived because of the blood in his veins. But the Decula family accused Friesen of countless crimes and decided to execute him. Because of that, in his past life, Astor had to hunt him down. He spent a long time on that pursuit, so long that he no longer knew how much time had passed, and he took pride in being able to find anyone on the continent. But Friesen was the only one who always escaped, being fast and impossible to track. Astor searched for him everywhere, in the gray zone, in the kingdom's slums, and even in the underworld, but found nothing. In the end, he realized Friesen was hiding in the demon realm, which almost drove him insane. Meanwhile, demon beasts attacked non-stop, and demonic energy rotted his body and destroyed his mind, until he gave up and left. Outside, a mercenary brought news that Friesen was dead, and it was later revealed that the Decula captured him and extracted everything about forbidden magic and the artifact. At that moment, Astor felt completely empty and spent days sitting in front of the demon realm, while Friesen still didn't understand anything and was weakened from blood loss. Astor gave him a potion and said he couldn't die yet and needed to listen until the end. While Friesen thought it was a chance to survive, Astor continued the story, saying that one day he saw an Ivern flying freely in the sky, and in that moment realized how much of an idiot he had become, since his revenge was no longer about his companions but had turned into nothing more than an emotional release. Friesen tried to get up and use forbidden magic to escape, but Astor slammed his head into the ground and said he had finally found him after all this time. He then began repeatedly smashing Friesen's head against the floor while saying he had been searching for the knowledge Friesen left behind, including the demon realm and forbidden magic. He also pulled his scythe back using his magic, stating that he would recreate every detail of that pain and that it would be fun. The torture continued for a while until professors and staff from the academy finally invaded the area to rescue the students. Professor Felina came down, visibly irritated, saying she had wasted too much time on that ancient magic. An assistant reported that the spells had been undone and the system restored, but she ordered them to prioritize the survivors and also use magic eyes to search for the injured. The assistants found severely wounded students and others in better condition, and Felina realized the intruders had controlled the challenge corridor for 2 hours. Even so, no students had died, which was good, but strange. Then Professor Perun contacted her, saying he was already in the internal control room and suggested she check the screen. When she saw it, Felina felt nauseated by the sight of dismembered and decapitated bodies, while Perun confirmed there were 2 intruders, and some assistants even vomited. Felina thought she had already seen many things, but that was too much. She then remembered the student file of Astor, a boy from the Gray Zone accepted through the Blandor family's entry rights, concluding that the margin of error had been exceeded and that he was not an ordinary student. Jaira commented that she didn't know what he was, but he needed to be closely monitored from now on. At that moment, the academy director appeared, a short, elderly man. Felina said he didn't need to come so far, but he replied that he had rushed over as quickly as possible and asked whether the one responsible for that scene was really that boy, already showing interest in Astor. Every mage has something called an inner demon, a cursed force that appears without warning and completely destabilizes the mind, something common among mages and almost never ending well. In Astor's past life, that didn't exist, since he was just a mercenary who took any job without question, and even watching companions die was part of the job. If they hadn't been killed by forbidden magic, he probably wouldn't be this enraged. He thought he had buried that anger, but emotions exploded inside him in that moment, and he ended up making a mistake. Remembering those old days, he felt as if he was carrying a bomb in his chest, something that could explode at any moment. Even so, he managed to stay in control, since as a former mercenary he was used to uncertainty, and that level of tension even felt familiar and useful. A week after the incident in the challenge corridor, with things finally calmer, Astor saw a perfect opportunity to analyze the Crimson Fire Grimoire. The secret art he had learned in his past life was a technique without attributes used by mercenaries, but learning an elemental secret art like Crimson Fire was something new to him. So he read the first chapter, called Ignition, several times, constantly checking if everything was correct. The primary mana circuits were not very different from celestial origin magic, but when mana circulated through fire circuits, it gained the flame attribute, which required a clear mental image. That image had to be simple, a solitary flame born from mana, burning on its own without relying on oxygen, a flame of the heart. Astor managed to perform ignition, and a blaze appeared in his hands, as powerful as before. Compared to normal mana, the power was almost double, but he still needed better control, since for now he could only use it once before reaching his limit. The recoil was much stronger than attributeless mana, making it impossible to use a collision technique with fire at that moment. Even so, he knew it was only a matter of time before he improved, and that brought him one step closer to that bastard and celestial origin magic. He had essentially added the fire attribute to his base, but he still still needed other useful spells, since fire magic didn't require as much compatibility with the secret art. While thinking about this, still hidden in the tower, Aster felt a presence approaching. He opened the doors and saw the director coming toward him, saying he now understood Professor Felina's suspicions, since Aster had good perception and clean control of a dangerous fire, making him different from the others. The director tried to intimidate him on the spot, but Aster simply wondered why everyone reacted like that when they saw him, since the same had happened with Windstor. As a former mercenary, he was more willing to be broken than to submit. The director then asked if he didn't intend to greet him, reminding him that he was the highest authority in the academy. Without hesitation, Aster bowed and said it was a pleasure to meet him, Director. The director commented that his manners were impeccable, but he might want to lower his voice. Aster replied in surprise, realizing he had actually been speaking loudly, and apologized, saying he was nervous. The director said there was no problem with speaking loudly, since he had isolated all sound around them. Aster then realized the situation had not been subtle, and thought the old man was sharper than he looked. The director explained that he had come to ask questions and sat down, saying the answers would be evaluated. The pressure of his magic was terrifying, enough to make Aster kneel. The surrounding rain seemed to stop under that force. While the director asked what he was hiding, Aster analyzed the flow of mana pressing against him, and synchronized it with his own flow, reducing the impact and indirectly easing the pressure recoil. He then replied that, from what the director was showing, the visit was related to the challenge corridor, and confirmed that he was the one who took care of those rats. The director asked if he wasn't going to try to hide it, and Aster answered that there was no need to deny it, only that it would be better if they didn't find out, though it also wasn't something he felt the need to conceal. Then he asked if there was anything else. The director looked visibly irritated for a moment, but only sighed. Aster noticed he was a rare kind of lunatic, someone who switched between seriousness and calm, and thought he seemed unstable. The director then said there was nothing wrong with Aster's attitude, and that he would only ask a few quick questions. A direct conversation. They both sat face to face, the atmosphere changing completely, as the director still looked like a wild war mage, though his pressure was now more controlled. Aster then asked first if he knew anything about an Avern that had been destroyed. The director replied in confusion and irritation, asking what that meant, but Aster continued calmly, saying he was just a student and nothing more. The director threatened not to tolerate questions like that anymore, and emphasized that, as a student, he should listen more, since on a battlefield, there is no difference between teacher and student. Aster wondered if that was really a battlefield, but simply replied that he understood, Director. The director then stared at him with wild eyes and asked what kind of scum had left things in that state. Aster realized the hostility wasn't directed at him, but at the ones responsible for the incident. He then asked what the director intended to do, and he replied that he would crush the organization behind it, and that even the Emperor would approve the action, gathering his old companions for it. Aster concluded that they were probably former war mages or knights who had fought alongside the director, people far from normal. In the end, he revealed that the ones responsible for the massacre were the Decula. The director then asked if he knew a mage who had supposedly been devoured by a wyvern, and Aster replied, "No sir, I don't know anything about that." The director immediately noticed the inconsistency in his answer, and insisted, saying it didn't add up and asking what he was hiding. Aster, realizing he was dealing with someone very intelligent, decided to change his story and said that it was actually the Vimar who served the Decula, explaining that one of them was a Vimar hunting dog, and the other a mage engineer named Friesen. The director then asked if there was any evidence of that, and Aster replied directly that it was everything that had been handed to him. The director found this extremely insolent, but still kept control, and only asked how he had met those people. The conversation continued more openly, and Aster told the full story, thinking he had responded in the best possible way, since he couldn't reveal his regression or the grimoire. Even so, he could feel how irritated the director still was, and he commented that something still seemed to be missing. Aster tried to downplay it, saying it was just a misunderstanding, but the director insisted and changed his tone, asking if he wanted to build a library as tall as a tower. He said it was too big a dream for a boy, but that if he left the top floor empty, he could fill it entirely with shelves for him. Aster thanked him, thinking that, as expected, everything in that world revolved around blood ties, regions, and academic connections. The director then mentioned the library admission ticket, saying he would give it if Aster did him a favor, but warned him to be careful with his gaze, saying he didn't need eyes to see the world. Aster replied that he was very eager for the favor and would accept it gladly. The director then explained that the favor could wait, that they would handle it at the right time, and mentioned an artifact that summons a demon realm, dangerous but useful in many ways, especially due to its spatial isolation, which could help in building Aster's future tower. Aster recognized that this was true, since the spatial isolation of that artifact could even disable the magic circles in the challenge corridor, something even professors couldn't break. He thought it would be extremely useful for protecting his future tower. Still, he told the director he didn't know much about magical technology, and the director replied that he should talk to Professor Felina, who could help and open some paths for him, since she was trustworthy. Even so, the director decided not to dig deeper into Aster's identity, saying it would only complicate things, and that they would take another path from now on. He explained the general plan, making it clear they would handle things step by step. The next day, Aster returned to class, and was approached by Damien and Chenbi, who were strangely a bit chubbier. Aster asked asked what had happened, but before they could even answer, several people approached Shenbi and thanked him, treating both him and Damien like celebrities. Shenbi explained that thanks to what Aster had said about the bracelets in the challenge corridor, everyone became grateful, and they even received gifts from friends and financial support from their families. He thanked Aster a lot, but Aster replied that there was no need to thank him, since he hadn't asked for anything, he had simply chosen to do it. Then Aster asked what Damien had done, and Shenbi explained that he had found a golem and started controlling it with plant magic. Aster thought the guy really was a monster, and that he should already stop being surprised by anything coming from him. Shenbi then sat down, excited, saying it had already been a week since they last talked, and that they had a lot to catch up on. At that moment, Professor Felina approached and said she also needed to speak with Aster, asking for a bit of his time. They went to her office, an extremely refined environment, and she asked if he already knew the reason for the summons. Aster replied that he did, that it was probably about the incident, and that he shouldn't give advice. Felina said she had already heard the full story, about a war mage descendant and the Vimar being behind the incident. Aster confirmed, saying they were all trash. She replied that anyone associated with the Decala was also trash, speaking in general terms. Aster then realized that the director had indeed pulled some strings, creating a story where he was the descendant of an old war mage who traveled while hiding his identity, and that his master held a grudge against the Decala and the Vimar, making that the official version of events. The scenario had been perfectly arranged. Felina said there were still suspicious points, but since the director had vouched for him, she would let it slide for now. She also said she would cover it up, since he didn't seem to be a threat to the academy. Aster noticed she was slightly blushing, and apologized, saying he was still just a student and there was an age difference, which might make things awkward. Felina looked confused and asked what he was talking about, quickly regaining her composure, and saying she only wanted to thank him, since he had dealt with the intruders and saved the students. Aster replied that she had probably already heard that from the director, and said his goal was to build an open library for everyone, asking if he could count on her support. Felina answered that it would be no problem, and that she could help. She then got straight to the point and spoke about the ancient artifact that summoned a demon realm, saying studying its application would take time and that the risks were high, though it could simply be destroyed if necessary. The real problem, however, was who would come after it. The forbidden magic cult known as Salvati, a group made up of forbidden magic users aiming to recreate the demon realm. She explained that Phrasen, the one responsible for everything that had happened, was likely connected to the cult, and since he was dead, it was certain they would come after Aster to recover the artifact. They would be persistent and dangerous enough to rival even the Decula. Felina then said she didn't know what he was hiding or how strong he really was, but if he became a target of the forbidden magic cult, he could die. Aster thought that if that was the case, then a fight was inevitable, but he didn't see it as something too concerning. In his mind, he would simply crush all his enemies. Still, he smiled lightly and told the professor he would keep that in mind. The professor found his expression strange and irritatingly provocative, but Aster ignored her reaction and took an artifact from his subspace, asking her to study it. Felina was surprised by his ambition, but agreed to analyze it. At that moment, an assistant professor burst into the office urgently, reporting a critical situation at the academy. The leader of the Decala house had arrived. An immediate order was given to reinforce security, monitor the injured students' families, and send all students back to their dormitories. Professors Felina, Parun, and the director were assigned to form the front commission and receive the visitor. The director observed Farron, the leader of the Decula, and reflected on who he was, a young genius who had taken over the family leadership, but also someone surrounded by rumors of atrocities. The director tried not to be influenced by gossip, recalling the academy founder's teachings. Even so, the situation was strange, as even royalty respected academy grounds, while Farron remained in his carriage, refusing to step onto the ground and even acting as his own driver, which felt like a direct break from tradition. Farron asked if the timing still wasn't right, mentioning the challenge corridor had been taken over by an intruder. The director replied irritably, releasing a surge of magical pressure that startled the surrounding professors. Even so, Farron maintained his arrogant posture and said he was only there to help, claiming he had personally captured the intruder. He then revealed the true reason for his visit, by pulling the heads of the Vimar family members from his subspace, stating that he had eliminated them all, both main and collateral branches. From the rooftop, Aster watched everything and realized this was expected, remembering that in his past life, Farron had always been that kind of person, capable of eliminating even allies for the sake of the Decula house. Still, the timing of the visit felt too perfect, making him wonder whether it was coincidence or meticulous obsession. In the following days, the academy was thrown into turmoil after Farron's full exposure of the Vimar lineage. In addition, he announced that a direct descendant of the Decula would be sent as a student to the academy, almost like disguised political control. Shortly after, the Empire also confirmed the enrollment of the third princess in the institution, further increasing the political impact of the situation. Aster decided to put it aside for now, since it would only happen next semester. The focus of the academy shifted to the Pistonic Festival, a grand celebration of victory for the students who had participated in the war era. The academy treated the incident in the challenge corridor as part of the same narrative, using the festival as a way to ease the tense atmosphere and reward the students. Because of that, alcohol was even allowed, with security provided by hired mercenaries. During the festival, a winner of a drinking competition, called out the next challenge. Damien placed a bag of gold on the table, determined to take part, while Chenbi panicked. Soon after, it was announced that the award ceremony would begin, and everyone had to gather in front of the Sage Hall. Damien ended up being pulled away by Aster, who decided to attend the ceremony instead of continuing to gamble. At the ceremony, the director gave a brief speech before handing out the rewards. The awardees were Dahlia of Dinai, Damien von Blandor, Eveline of Plancher, Chenbi, and Aster. Aster recognized Eveline of Plancher, the daughter of the Gold Ring Exchange Company, and found something odd about her, since she hadn't stood out in his memory from his past life, even though witnesses claimed she had played a major role in the invasion during the midterm assessment. During the award distribution, Chenbi was extremely nervous. The director handed Aster a high-level elixir as a form of gratitude. In silence, they exchanged cold looks, and Aster mentally asked if he could simply throw it away, since he didn't like the box. Sensing his attitude, the director responded threateningly that if he threw it away, he might end up being thrown into the incinerator along with it. Aster simply concluded that he would burn it later in secret. After the ceremony, everyone wandered around the academy enjoying the festival. For the first time in a long while, Aster had a brief moment of rest. Damien stuffed himself with food and enjoyed the event to the fullest, while Chenbi simply watched everything still tense. By the end of the day, everyone watched fireworks lighting up the sky. Aster watched the fireworks with some indifference, thinking it was a waste of money, although he admitted it was beautiful. Even so, he realized he had always struggled to enjoy moments like that, since his mind was constantly stuck on the present and especially the future. Aster thought that one day, when he built his own tower, he could finally splurge like that. He imagined buying fireworks just to use them at the top of it, even if the view wasn't anything special, since he would watch everything from the top floor, still able to see the ground below. He also thought about holding a festival that lasted an entire week, until he simply got tired of watching. In the end, on the day of the Sage Ascension ceremony, he would be there, riding an Evern that would mark a new era for the continent, smiling at everything, and a white Evern would even fit that image. The next morning, however, Aster was approached by a white owl that strangely resembled the director. The bird carried a letter tied to its leg, a message asking him to meet at the usual place. As expected, it was indeed an order from the director. Aster followed the owl to the meeting point, with it perched on his head, and arrived at an old building that had once been used by mercenaries, but was now abandoned and forgotten by the academy. From the outside it looked decayed, but the interior was well kept, and inside he found the director with the same usual disdainful expression, who even offered tea as if nothing mattered. Aster asked why he had been summoned so early, and the director replied that he had already said he wanted to ask for a favor, something simple, just deliver a letter to a friend, that was all. But Aster already sensed it wasn't simple, because when something seemed too easy, it usually meant big trouble. He then asked where he needed to go, and the director explained that he had investigated with old contacts, and discovered where the target was hiding, in the Great Hammern Forest. Aster immediately understood the scale of it. The Great Hammern Forest was an ancient wild region filled with monsters and valuable magical materials scattered everywhere, a dangerous yet extremely useful place. Still, that was where he had to go. The director commented that it wouldn't be too complicated, since there were people living in the forest, and he would only need to check the base camps to find the target. Soon after, the director revealed the true reward and showed a contract, offering 2 top-rank elixirs, 5 high-rank elixirs, and 10 mid-rank elixirs if the request was completed. Aster didn't waste time and accepted, saying he might take a while to return to the academy. For him, the reward was far too valuable to refuse. Leaving the office, Aster reread the contract while taking a deep breath, feeling that just the paper itself already gave him a good feeling. Adding that to the festival reward, he already had 3 top-rank elixirs. To him, that was practically a perfect life. In addition, he had also received a voucher from the Irken Artifact Workshop, a prestigious institution even among noble families. The director also explained that the original idea had been to bring that man back to the academy, since with the demon realm, the Decula, and all the instability, they needed help. But the target had said he still had matters to resolve, so Aster was basically going there to finish that personal issue and bring him back. Aster analyzed the situation and realized it was basically a disguised job and a trap, but he still managed to negotiate an even greater compensation. He had almost come out at a loss, but in the end he ended up gaining more than expected. Initially he had planned to use the elixirs to increase his mana, but now that he had 3 of them, he decided to change his plan. He decided to focus on a more efficient method, a technique based on the strengthened bodies of knights and the use of aether as a reference. His goal was to develop the mana limbs, a technique that in his past life had already allowed him to surpass human limits. Now he wanted to transform his body into something close to that of a knight, while still maintaining all the complexity of a mage with collision formulas, interference, and other advanced techniques. The objective was simple: go even further than before. Later, Aster was already in meditation. He consumed the first elixir and began concentrating his mana, using his usual breathing technique, but now directing every drop of the elixir into his own body. The mana was distributed through joints, muscle fibers, and nerves, as if everything was being rebuilt from within. But then came the pain, a deep pain that made him lose focus for a moment. The fire mark on his heart flared up again, interfering with the flow of energy. Even so, he calmed himself, thinking that if that mark was active, it might still bring some unexpected advantage. He continued the process as planned, circulating mana throughout his entire body instead of using only the normal circuits. But when he began injecting energy directly into his muscle fibers, the sensation stopped being merely painful and turned into true torture. Aster felt as if his body was being torn into thousands of pieces. For a moment, he wondered if he really needed to endure so much pain for it to work. But even so, he held on, screaming as best he could while forcing the process to the end. After some time, the so-called mana limbs were complete, or perhaps even beyond that. His body couldn't fully withstand the technique's power, but it still evolved to an absurd level. He would no longer lose to an ordinary knight, for example. A mage capable of defeating a knight in physical combat was something almost unthinkable. First, he tested his own regeneration. He bit his finger hard, much harder than expected. The bite was heavy, blood gushed out, but within moments the wound began to close on its own. What should have taken around 15 minutes to heal now regenerated at an abnormal speed, almost at the level of a troll. Even in his past life, he had never seen anything like it. He had received an unexpected bonus. If he combined that with the secret grimoire of healing light he had obtained from Windstor, he could reach a level close to Damien, a monster among the Blandor. But Aster set that thought aside for now. In the middle of his analysis, he noticed something strange in his own blood, a faint but familiar mana, whose nature was very similar to his own. He tested his light emission magic, and suddenly it exploded in an unstable way within his own blood. The magic was being cast by his will, but the source was not only him, it was his blood itself. If he increased the blood volume and applied a collision formula, it could evolve into something on a completely different level. If combined with the Blandor family's healing, a proliferation formula capable of regenerating flesh and blood, it could become something even more absurd. He decided not to involve Wenji in this. Still, another issue was emerging. Lancey was about to come for the parents' council before the normal classes even began, so he planned to talk about it then. He decided to provisionally name it blood magic. Later, Aster met with Lancey, servant of the Blandor family, along with Damien and Chenbi. Damien claimed he was completely healthy and quickly sent Lancey away, while Chenbi, for some reason, seemed completely infatuated with her. Lancey then delivered a message from Lady Gamo, speaking about an architectural proposal for building an indoor lake and a statue for the Blandor family. Aster tried to understand the reference from their previous conversation, and thought it might be related to the works known as Blood, Sweat, and Tears No. 1 and 2, the statuettes made by Damien. However, Lancey informed them that the proposal had been denied. Still, she asked them not to give up, saying that if Damien, Aster, and the others placed within the top 16 in the midterm evaluation, something might be reconsidered. Aster understood it as a form of motivation from Lady Gamo. Lancey also added that there was no need to worry, as she trusted their potential, and offered support from the Blandor family if they helped Damien. Damien gave a strange, almost unsettling smile, while Aster simply thought that the phase of patience and suffering had finally arrived. He sighed and agreed to help, even if reluctantly. Later, Aster was studying with Damien, trying to understand how much he actually knew about basic magic. Damien simply threw several notebooks and books onto the table, saying he had brought everything he owned. Chenbi and Aster immediately felt that it would be a disaster. When Chenbi asked if he had properly completed all his assignments, Damien confidently said yes. Aster, however, saw several scribbled pages and strange drawings, including references to Blood, Sweat, and Tears No. 2, the Mana Dragon. It became clear that, despite being talented, Damien was completely lost in magical theory. On the other hand, he did well in culture and history, probably due to his family upbringing. Beyond that, in magical subjects, he was practically an absolute void, a true genius without theoretical foundation. Then Furion approached them, saying he didn't want to interrupt, but he had overheard the conversation and asked if they were really going to help Damien. He suggested that he could also contribute. It immediately became clear that he had something prepared. In his hands, he carried a detailed compilation of the Academy's recent evaluations, including exams, topics, and key points, organized in a summarized form. Chenbi became emotional, almost crying with relief at seeing a real chance of saving Damien academically. Aster remembered what Furion had done in the challenge corridor, and didn't like him at all, but he still accepted the help, even if reluctantly. He wanted to hit the guy but held himself back. However, Furion imposed a condition. He wanted Aster's help in a duel that would take place after the midterm evaluation, since he recognized his combat knowledge. Aster accepted immediately, even offering to go to the training room right away. But Furion refused. The help wasn't for him, but for someone else. He then took Aster outside the academy, toward the city of Haze, going through alleys and strange paths. Aster was already irritated, thinking he couldn't take this anymore, and just wanted to beat him up. In the end, they arrived at a massive building with elegant architecture, a private training center. It became clear that the person he would be training was very wealthy, and then it was revealed. It was Furion's sister. Furion asked if she really needed that guy. He seemed good in combat, but still showed doubt. She replied that yes, she needed him. him, since she didn't want to rely solely on her family's influence to reach the top. She greeted Aster, and he made a proposal, suggesting using Furion instead of him for training, since he also needed to give private lessons to Damien. Furion asked if Dahlia was really considering that, and made it clear he wouldn't accept the idea, saying he had already paid his share of the agreement with study materials. He also reminded them that what had happened with Chenbi in the challenge corridors still needed to be settled. Dahlia replied that, as far as she was concerned, it was fine. Furion got irritated, questioning why they were making decisions for him, and saying he wouldn't accept it, since he was a proud descendant of the Denai family, with his own will. Aster replied that he could say that all he wanted, but he needed a punching bag, and Furion seemed much more durable than the other guy. After that, Furion calmed down and said he didn't have much time, since the evaluation was approaching, and he had to leave. Aster thought that was good, since Chenbi could rest a bit. Having already received payment, he decided to fulfill his part, and asked Dahlia if she wanted to train hand-to-hand combat. Later, Dibei was having lunch with Eveline, and she asked if he wanted to try again, saying he was trying too hard. After a recent incident in the challenge corridor, customer complaints had increased a lot, and no one had been able to obtain a bracelet there. According to her, preparations for the evaluations would be ready next week. Dibei asked if she wanted him to steal the exam, but she replied that it would be a huge problem, and that she was only mentioning it hoping for some help from him. As if the conversation didn't matter, she left a note on the table with an address and told him to eat as well before the food got cold. Later, walking through Dahlia's massive training center, Aster thought that this outcome was something he hadn't expected. In his past life, he would have snapped her neck without hesitation for talking nonsense, since their relationship was always hostile and she had remained the same difficult person as always. If not for the enhancements, he would have killed her several times already. When she became the chief mage of Dene, they practically stopped meeting. Still, putting the conflicts aside, he concluded that training Dahlia could be beneficial, since in the future she would oppose the Decula, and he could anticipate that outcome. He decided to start from the basics, and asked what she thought was most important in hand-to-hand combat. She replied that she didn't know, and only wanted to learn the move Aster had used against Exter. He said he wouldn't simply teach her his technique, and that she needed something that suited her. Then he asked who would win between an official 8th rank mage and a 9th rank one. She replied the 8th rank one, since it was higher. Aster said she was wrong, because in the end the winner is whoever strikes first, whoever destroys the enemy first. Then he released mana toward her to reinforce the point. By the end of the day, he was already relaxed and thought that if Dahlia kept getting beaten like that, she would improve quickly. Still, he remained concerned about the Denai family. On the way, he happened to see Dibei, who looked like a walking bag of gold wandering around. Dibei thought they were trying to involve him again in stealing exam papers. Even though he wanted out of that situation, he realized Eveline had enough influence to make it happen, and that it could also be an opportunity to build connections with noble families if he handled it properly. Unaware that he was being followed by Aster, Dibei arrived at the meeting point, which looked like an ordinary tea house. The attendant asked for his order, and he replied that he wanted dragon horn tea, both extremely hot and ice cold at the same time. The attendant accepted normally, and Dibei thought this was indeed the place Eveline had mentioned, feeling relieved he hadn't said the code in a normal place. While serving the tea, the attendant commented that many people get scared by the atmosphere when they hear black market, imagining secret places, but in reality it was just a tea house. He asked how Dibei found the place, and Dibei replied he came to pick up exam papers for first-year basic classes. The attendant then said someone was willing to sell the material and asked which department he wanted. Dibei answered the magic department, and the attendant mentioned that coincidentally there was already a meeting scheduled with the seller for the weekend, and he could join. Dibei realized they were trying to pull him deeper into the situation, but acted natural and agreed, since checking the seller and the quality of materials was normal. The attendant then informed him of the time and location of the meeting. Aster, seeing the whole situation, thought it was complete bullshit that a seller of exam papers conveniently appeared at the exact same time a buyer showed up. It was clearly wrong, and they hadn't even discussed the price yet, which made everything even more suspicious. He decided he wanted to see it personally, so he pulled a cloak and mask from his subspace, planning to act on his own, even thinking he might start by robbing a richer target first. When Dibei was left alone again, the attendant thought the whole thing was boring, and that once this job was over he should leave Risa as well, since stealing the academy exam papers would make things too dangerous afterward. The problem was that he didn't even know where he would go next. At that moment, someone called out to him, and the attendant was startled because he hadn't noticed that presence at all. It was a masked figure, and he immediately realized it was one of the Decula Tigers, a jade ruby. The cloak and mask Aster was wearing belonged precisely to the Decula Tigers. Aster told the attendant to stop with the bad acting and skip the whole dragon horn tea story. The attendant then got straight to the point and asked what he wanted. Aster replied that he wanted an item, a subspace bag. The attendant asked if he meant Callahan's bag, the one that disappeared after his death, saying they had never seen such an item there. Aster asked if that was true, and then questioned who the attendant had been speaking with earlier, saying the situation seemed suspicious. He then pressured the attendant with his mana, stating that his thoughts were making too much noise, and demanded answers. The attendant said he would honestly explain everything about the boy, insisting it had nothing to do with the Decula clan. The masked figure listened in silence but decided he still wasn't done. He said they would continue continue talking on the way to the warehouse, since he wanted to inspect the goods personally and see if anything was hidden. The attendant was left in shock, completely unsure of what to do at that moment. The poor attendant continued guiding Aster while asking if he truly intended to take things this far. Aster replied that if he was innocent, nothing would happen. After all, he swore in the name of the Decula that anything done there would remain secret forever. The attendant then explained that the boy's work had been commissioned by Eveline, daughter of the Gold Ring Exchange Company. Since he was merely someone who did business for money, he did not know all the details, but he was aware that she was trying to create a black market within the academy to sell exam answers. Aster knew Eveline's reputation. She was seen as a model student, polite, popular among her classmates, and always wearing a beautiful smile. That was why it was strange to discover that someone with such a perfect image was involved in something like this. What truly irritated Aster was not her hypocrisy, but the fact that he was not the one making that easy money. While one person was stuck working as a private tutor, another was profiting effortlessly. That was complete bullshit. Eventually, the attendant led him to a warehouse where various treasures were being stored. After looking around, Aster remarked that, from what he could see, there did not appear to be any problems, but the family should still investigate everything carefully. He ordered them to prepare 2 subspace bags, as he would be taking any suspicious items found there with him. The attendant simply watched and thought that this bastard truly had no shame. Meanwhile, Chenbi continued trying to teach Damien von Blandor, who had somehow removed the stabilization formula from a spell and still managed to keep it functioning. Damien insisted that the annoying formula was unnecessary, but Chenbi explained that things did not work that way. Beside them, Furion watched everything and thought that this place was a living hell. Damien was undoubtedly a genius, but the kind of genius to whom common sense simply did not apply. According to every calculation, what he was doing should have been impossible, yet to him it seemed absurdly simple. Even so, Furion believed that if that bastard Aster taught Dahlia properly, everything would work out. Then he paused for a moment and realized that perhaps Aster was actually corrupting his sister. As if to confirm that concern, Dahlia appeared at that very moment to speak with him, completely battered and covered in injuries. Furion had to make a tremendous effort not to run off and hunt Aster down. Thus, a week passed. The group was still trying to teach Damien when Chenbi asked Furion how the sections he had analyzed were looking. Furion replied that everything seemed correct and that, fortunately, he had gotten all the answers right. Damien immediately celebrated, saying that he could finally reap the blood, sweat, and tears of his own efforts. Hearing that, Furion thought that it truly had been a week filled with blood, sweat, and tears. The problems they had solved were basic, but they still represented progress. He had fulfilled his part of the job, and now he hoped Aster was doing the same. At that moment, Aster was sitting on the rooftops, observing the activities of the black market. He was still wearing a cloak and the Decula mask. Suddenly, his ear began to itch, and he figured someone must be talking about him. His target was Dibe, who was walking with extreme tension while carrying several documents. Aster would have loved to create a huge mess involving Eveline and Dibe, but he decided to restrain himself. After all, there were certainly buyers waiting for those answers. A short while later, Dibe approached a guard stationed at the entrance of a building. Using a crystal orb, Aster began recording everything. Soon afterward, Dibe handed Eveline documents containing the 4 core magical subjects of the first-year basic class, along with 2 general education courses. The papers also included events and evaluation methods related to the practical examination. A hooded figure examined the documents and confirmed that both the quality of the paper and the symbols matched those used by the academy. Even the mana signature was authentic. Satisfied, Eveline commented that he had delivered the goods exactly as agreed. Because of that, they would continue providing opportunities to Dibe. In addition, the Pingro Exchange Company would receive support, and they would make sure everyone knew that it had happened thanks to him. Upon hearing that, Dibe thought that his family would no longer be able to ignore him. Eveline then explained that they would carefully review everything before contacting him again. From that point onward, Dibe would also be responsible for distributing the papers to customers. After he left, Eveline called him a complete idiot and asked her associate whether everything was proceeding according to plan. He replied that it was and informed her that within a few days, all operations connected to the young lady would be transferred to Dibe's name and to the Pingro Exchange Company. Eveline merely ordered them to continue without delay. After all, that idiot existed precisely for that purpose. Watching everything from afar, Aster concluded that he had known she was rotten, but this was on another level. Even so, there might be a better way to handle the situation. He needed to put an end to that scheme and make sure Eveline never got involved in anything like it again. Breaking into the office was incredibly easy. Aster recorded everything with his crystal orb, but realized it would be a waste to use that evidence right now. Normally, he would solve everything by beating someone up or creating a massive scene, but acting discreetly was far more complicated. Then an idea came to him. Perhaps there was a way to put her back on the right path. He picked up a quill, some ink, and several blank scrolls, then began to write. His forgery skills were not nearly as rusty as he had expected. When he was younger, he used to imitate different handwriting styles for fun. He had never imagined that he would one day put that skill to use again. With patience, he copied the entire contents onto a new scroll, stamped it with Eveline's seal, and admired the final result. Proud of his work, he even found himself thinking that she was becoming quite a good person. Meanwhile, Dahlia continued training without rest, pushing pushing forward even through the night. She believed that the first strike was what decided a battle. In other words, the spell that could be activated the fastest and cast almost instinctively would be the one that won. After all, even a genius would die if their head were crushed. At last, the day of the evaluation arrived. When everything was over, the students began discussing their answers among themselves, comparing choices, theories, and opinions regarding each question. One particular student was drawing a great deal of attention. He had never been known for being especially studious, yet he had correctly answered several questions that practically no one else could solve. Seeing this, Aveline thought that the first transaction had been a complete success. The student in question was Deminem von Haramir, the eldest son of Viscount Haramir, whose family controlled the kingdom's largest grain warehouses. Securing priority access to those cereal fields through the leaked exam answers had been a perfect move. And that was only the beginning. Aveline had 4 similar deals taking place simultaneously, and the other clients promised to generate just as much profit as Deminem. Suddenly, however, an academy employee entered the room, accompanied by several of Eveline's clients, as well as Debay. The employee called for Deminem and informed him that the director was waiting for him. At that moment, Aveline felt a chill run down her spine. Had they discovered something? The following morning, it was announced that all first-year students from the common class were to gather immediately in the grand hall for an emergency meeting. When they arrived, they learned that the subject concerned cheating on examinations. Aveline began wondering who had made a mistake. She was certain it had not been her. She had been extremely careful and had not left behind a single trace. Perhaps it had been Debay. No, that could not be it. He might have been slow, but he was not stupid enough to ruin everything like that. Shortly afterward, an official began speaking through a magical microphone. He said that rumors were already spreading and that he would clarify the situation for those who were still unaware of the facts. Numerous students had been caught cheating during the first-year semester examinations. It was regrettable that a scandal of such magnitude had occurred within the academy. He then revealed that the primary culprit identified was Debay, along with 4 accomplices. All 5 had been expelled immediately, and the academy would also demand full compensation for the damages caused. But the surprise did not end there. The official explained that it had not been the faculty who uncovered the scheme. In fact, everything had been made possible by the efforts of a student with an unwavering sense of justice. That was why everyone had gathered there, to recognize her courage. Then he called Aveline to the stage. She simply could not understand what was happening. As everyone applauded, Aveline tried to explain that it had not been her. However, people interpreted her words as nothing more than modesty. Unable to understand what kind of madness was unfolding, she walked toward the podium, thinking that none of this made any sense. She was not stupid enough to expose her own operation, and now she was about to receive an award ceremony because of it. From within the crowd, Astor watched everything while applauding. In his opinion, it was a wonderful spectacle. After all, Aveline would now have to live as a righteous and honorable person, the heroine of the failures, the Academy's benevolent judge. A week passed after all the chaos, and the rankings were finally released. Chenby and Damien rushed over to check the boy's placement. When they found his name, they were shocked. At first, he appeared to be ranked only 18th, but then Astor told the two of them to pay attention instead of acting like idiots. Deminem was still listed above them because the ranking was incorrect. Shortly afterward, an employee arrived carrying the corrected version of the rankings and replaced the previous one. This time, Damien appeared in 16th place. The two immediately celebrated. Meanwhile, Astor could only think that the Blander family would probably provide an excellent reward for that result. After all the effort he had put in, it was the least he deserved. Excited, Chenby commented that perhaps Astor truly had a talent for teaching. After graduation, he could remain in the advanced class and even apply to become an assistant instructor. Astor told him to shut up and asked whether he knew that an assistant had been involved in the leaked answer incident. Chenby replied that he did. The man had been so financially desperate that he sold exam answers simply to survive. Then Astor said that was exactly the life of an assistant professor. Miserable. He then asked how long it took for someone to become an associate professor. Chenby replied that it was somewhere between 3 and 4 years. At least, that was what Professor Parun had told him. Hearing that, Astor asked if he really wanted to follow that path. Chenby admitted that, in a way, teaching seemed rewarding. Then he asked whether Astor truly believed he was not suited for it. As he spoke, he watched Damien, who was still celebrating his own results. Astor replied that if he truly wanted to teach, there was a much better path. He should become an archmage, someone so powerful that no one would dare question him. That way, he could train his students without the slightest mercy, exactly as he had done with that idiot Damien. For a moment, Chenby found himself imagining it. Could he really become an archmage someday? As far as Astor was concerned, he needed to dream bigger. After everything he had done for Damien, becoming nothing more than an assistant professor would be a waste. Chenby was far too talented for something so small. He needed to become an archmage. Besides, that way he could repay someone for saving his life. Deep down, Astor was still an absurdly self-interested man. Meanwhile, far away and hidden in the suburbs, several men were discussing ancient ruins discovered within the Hammern Forest. According to the rumors, it had the potential to become a major event. A few days later, the group met Lancey at the academy to receive their reward. Astor wanted a proliferation formula. According to Lancey, obtaining the primary formula would be difficult, but several versions had been released for academic exchanges. Among them, she decided to give him one with a particularly high classification. That surprised Aster. It was an unexpected gain. Lancey then turned her attention to Chenbi and apologized for looking into his situation a little. She explained that she had discovered some problems within his family and asked whether he was aware of them. Chenbi replied that he was, but that things had improved recently. Lancey then explained that the Blandor house could solve all of those problems. Not only that, but they could also provide much better conditions for his family. Chenbi asked if that meant leaving this place behind. Lancey replied that he did not need to see it as a burden or as something rude to accept, but Chenbi politely refused. He explained that, in the end, all he really wanted was to remain Damien's friend. Lancey was delighted to hear that, and the two ended up sharing a rather heartwarming moment together. Watching the scene, Aster thought that perhaps he was the only piece of trash among them. Shortly afterward, Chenbi said that if he had the opportunity in the future, he would like to study magic at Blandor House. He wanted to broaden his horizons and learn more about the world of magic. Lancey asked whether that would truly be enough for him, and Chenbi answered without hesitation that yes, it was more than enough. Meanwhile, Madame Gamma received the news through her butler, a gigantic man who looked more like a walking wardrobe than a human being. After hearing everything, she remarked that it was good that Damien had found another such good friend. According to her, that friend had already taught the boy many things and would certainly be able to help him even more in the future. Sometime later, it was officially declared that, from that day onward, Chenbi would become a protege of Blandor House. He was completely shocked and deeply moved by the announcement. In the end, the semester evaluation concluded with excellent results for nearly everyone involved. Sometime later, Professor Jaira made an important announcement. She informed the students that, starting that day, they would enter the preparatory period for interpersonal combat. The change applied only to the basic class, and all general education subjects would be temporarily suspended. From now on, the entire focus would be on practical combat training. However, there was one important difference. All training would be left entirely to the students' discretion. The preparatory classes would continue to operate as usual, but attendance would not be mandatory. One student raised her hand and asked what exactly that meant. Jaira explained that it meant exactly what it sounded like. Students could choose whether or not to attend classes. They could also return home and train on their own if they preferred. The professors would be fully responsible for the preparatory classes, with support from a large number of active combat mages certified at grade 5 by the Imperial Court. Hearing that, Aster realized that something was wrong. The schedule had suddenly been altered to focus on interpersonal combat. The professors were clearly hiding something. A change on that scale was unlikely to have originated from them. That decision had undoubtedly come from someone much higher up in the hierarchy. That same night, he received another message from the director, arranging a meeting for 8 o'clock. When Aster arrived at the designated location, he noticed that several extremely powerful barriers surrounded the warehouse. The director had turned the place into a true hideout. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Aster decided to finally test his proliferation formula. He spilled a few drops of his own blood, which spread throughout the area as the formula took effect. The tiny rubies created from the blood began absorbing mana from the surroundings and replicated themselves perfectly. The problem was that the amount of magical power was still insufficient. At that moment, the director appeared behind him and asked what the hell he was doing. He observed that the mana within those rubies seemed to belong to Aster himself and wanted to know whether he could cast magic through them. In response, Aster detonated one of the rubies with fire and said that it was more or less like that. The director was completely shocked. He asked whether it was possible to store unrefined mana within the rubies and cast spells using that energy. He also wanted to know the technique's range and, most importantly, how Aster had managed to develop something like that. Aster merely smiled and said he would explain everything later, but first, he wanted to ask for a favor. The director replied that he was quite bold and asked whether he wanted to use him as a training dummy. To Aster, that was perfect for the tests he intended to conduct, so he asked the old man to keep his guard up. The director responded that no matter how hard he tried, he would never be able to touch a single hair on his head. Aster admitted that was probably true. Even so, he gathered all the rubies once more, until enough mana had accumulated. The drops of blood scattered throughout the area connected through magical energy. Then he unleashed Ruby Impact. A massive explosion shook the interior of the barrier. The attack was powerful, but Aster was still somewhat disappointed. He had expected an even greater result. The director then asked him to be honest, and demanded to know where the hell a kid like him had come from. He already knew that Aster's mana was absurdly pure for someone his age, but this went beyond anything he could understand. Aster replied that he was a completely normal person, and asked what exactly the director thought he was. A great demon possessing someone else's body, perhaps? The director answered that his definition of normal was very different from everyone else's. Then he asked whether there was some way to open his skull and fix that problem. The spell was so bizarre that he could barely understand the principles behind it. Deciding to change the subject, the director pointed at the small red orbs and asked what exactly those things were. As an answer, Aster showed him his injured finger. In theory, that was supposed to explain that the orbs were made from his own blood, more specifically from his red blood cells. The problem was that immediately after showing his finger, he received a smack on the head so hard that a huge lump formed. A short while later, the owl landed directly on top of the lump, making the situation even more ridiculous. Rubbing his head, Aster finally asked why he had been summoned that night. The director replied that he needed to discuss the Great Forest. Before giving any explanation, he asked Aster to look into a crystal ball. The moment he saw the recording, Aster was shocked. The Great Hamren Forest had remained virtually untouched since ancient times. All kinds of monsters inhabited the region. Humans were adaptable creatures, and even in such a hostile environment, they had managed to survive. Even so, only elite mercenaries could safely operate within the forest. However, in the footage, Aster saw something extremely strange. Experienced mercenaries were trembling in fear. That was not normal. The reason soon became clear. They were undead monsters. Not the common kind. The director said that he had probably already understood what had happened. Ordinary undead moved because of the remnants of memories left behind in their bodies. Those, however, were moving because of their very souls. Aster immediately arrived at the correct conclusion. Those were self-born undead. And that could only mean one thing. Ancient ruins were hidden somewhere within the forest. The director explained that those creatures were known as destroyers, a name given to the most impure among all pure things. The destroyer sealed within the ancient ruins had managed to break free, and the vengeful spirits from the depths had begun to emerge in pursuit of it. The situation was extremely urgent. However, among all of his disciples, none could leave immediately. At best, it would take them 2 days to reach the location. Even so, the director made it clear that even if Aster refused the mission, the reward would still be his. He should consider it a gift to the new generation. Hearing that, Aster asked whether accepting the mission would earn him any additional rewards. The director replied that it would, but everything depended on his own willingness. This was not a situation where material rewards should serve as motivation. It was a dangerous mission, and his life would be at risk. Even so, Aster accepted without giving it much thought. Poor director. He clearly had no idea how thirsty that boy was for money and anything valuable. Aster then asked whether the director was worried about his friend. Judging by the situation, he would not back down even if it cost him his life. He might not have been a model of morality, but he was not rotten to that extent either. The director remained silent. The truth was that Aster had already decided to go to the forest regardless, even if the director tried to stop him. The mark within his heart clearly told him that what he was searching for was located in the Great Forest. And honestly, how could anyone resist a temptation like that? Before his departure, the director handed him a teleportation ticket that would take him directly to the forest. He also gave him a cloak equipped with a protective magic artifact. Aster asked whether he intended to leave himself with nothing, considering how casually he was handing out so many valuable items. The director replied that when the time came, it would already be too late to prepare. In addition, he gave him a mask marked with the Sakuo seal. According to him, Aster would end up using a mask or some concealment magic anyway. With that mark, however, his allies would not lose track of him without realizing it. Aster thought the old man had hit the nail right on the head. The director assured him that everything would be officially registered under his name, and asked about Blandor House. Aster replied that he would handle that matter himself. The only notice he left for Chenbi and Damien, however, was an extremely simple note. "I'm heading out to train. Don't worry, I'll be back soon." When Chenbi read it, he had absolutely no idea what it meant. Damien, on the other hand, merely commented that he wanted to go train as well. Later, in Greentown, a city located near the Great Hamren Forest, several workers were complaining about yet another monster outbreak. The situation was hurting local trade, and they were already tired of dealing with the same problem over and over again. Amid the complaints, criticism of the Empire began to surface. According to them, the Imperials only showed up to collect taxes. Whenever the citizens actually needed help, nobody appeared. Meanwhile, inside a tavern, a man watched everything with concern. He had received a message informing him that an old friend would be sending assistance. The man would not come personally, but he would send someone in his place. At the same table, a gigantic mercenary named Rayleigh was practically begging Lord Oberon to spare him. He did not want to return to the Great Hamren Forest under any circumstances. In his opinion, it was practically a death sentence, but Oberon reminded him that there was an escort contract between the 4th Base Camp and Greentown. They had already received an advance payment 4 times larger than normal, precisely because of the risk involved. Rayleigh replied that he understood all of that. He knew the situation was difficult for the mage as well. Even so, he asked where they were supposed to find another guide at this point. Finally, he apologized and admitted the truth. He wanted to live. Monsters could appear at any moment. While Oberon lowered his head, Rayleigh was already making plans of his own. He had no intention of returning to either the camp or Greentown. He was not crazy. His plan was to accompany that powerful mage, make as much money as possible, and then disappear. Once he got rid of that naive mage, he would add up his profits and move to a quiet village where he could live in peace. That was when he noticed something strange. There was another person sitting at the table. The two men jumped in surprise. The masked figure asked for the man's name. Oberon introduced himself respectfully. Shortly afterward, the masked figure asked whether Linheim was his mentor. When Oberon confirmed it, the masked figure stated that he had come to the right place, and said that they could call him Senior. Upon hearing that, Rayleigh believed that the reinforcements had finally arrived. Excited, he suggested that Oberon hand over his map of the Great Forest to the newcomer. After all, he himself did not have the courage to risk his life. But Oberon did not understand that attitude. Besides, someone who knew his mentor had just arrived. From that point onward, they should be able to manage on their own. However, when Rayleigh tried to leave, the masked figure stopped him. He told the man to sit back down. He said it would only take a few seconds. Then he added that if he didn't sit down, he would die. When Rayleigh hesitated, the masked man simply leaped forward with a flying kick. Right afterward, he unleashed a barrage of kicks while the mercenary rolled across the ground, begging for mercy. Watching the scene, Oberon began to think that maybe this guy really could destroy the destroyer. Meanwhile, elsewhere, several influential figures were monitoring the situation involving the destroyer. The creature was still gathering dark energy. The seal had not yet completely broken. One of them remarked that the spell was working properly. Apparently, it would still take some time. The other man found that strange. The aura of death had spread everywhere. That meant the seal was weakening rapidly. Even so, the destroyer had not awakened yet, despite the spells they were using. However, they had another problem to deal with. An old war mage was also searching for the destroyer. The first man explained that he needed to remain there to keep the rupture spell active, and asked whether his companion could handle the matter alone. The man in the suit simply smiled. He replied that this was a hunt. Then he asked whether Solian had any idea how many war mages' heads he kept inside his own subspace. It didn't matter what kind of monster he was facing. He would never turn a blind eye to his own blood. Meanwhile, a thoroughly beaten Rayleigh was making his way through the forest alongside Aster and Oberon. Oberon thought that, in the end, everything had worked out. Just minutes earlier, he had been desperately trying to figure out how to save the guide and how they would return with nothing but a map. But that masked man had solved everything. Judging by his height, he seemed to be around the same age as Oberon, yet his abilities were absurd. During the journey, Aster asked the guide if he wanted to store his belongings in a subspace. Rayleigh immediately refused. He said his backpack contained emergency supplies that might be needed at any moment. Hearing that, Aster thought that the bastard was still looking for an excuse to hide his possessions and avoid getting robbed. That was when the entire clearing began to shake. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Heavy footsteps were rapidly approaching, and soon they saw the reason. Orcs riding enormous beasts were charging straight toward them. Rayleigh recognized those monsters as Oberon orcs, but he had no idea how they had gotten there. They were far from the second base camp. Oberon also found the situation strange and thought those creatures were moving far too fast. He needed to try to stop them, but before he could do anything, Aster had already spread his blood across the battlefield and simply told him to raise a shield. A moment later, he launched his explosive blood droplets. The explosions instantly obliterated the orcs. When the smoke finally cleared, everyone was confronted with a massive crater where the monsters had been. The only reason they hadn't been affected was because Oberon's shield had protected them from the blast. After that, Rayleigh asked the mage if he could use his subspace to store a few things. Aster replied that he could. No problem at all. Later, they ended up encountering goblins along the way, but it was becoming quite irritating. Several appeared at once, and Aster was confused when he looked at them. Since when were goblins over 2 meters tall and so muscular? At first, he had even thought he was looking at a troll. Rayleigh examined one of the corpses more closely and explained that they were hot goblins, creatures that lived near the second camp. The problem was that seeing them so far from their territory could mean one of two things. Either their territory was expanding, or something behind them was forcing them to flee. Most likely, it was the latter. He pointed out that the monsters' claws were covered in dust and bits of tree bark, while the soles of their feet were torn apart. Those goblins were clearly running from something. Normally, hot goblins hunted in groups and occupied the top of the food chain in that region. If something had frightened so many of them at once, then it was not a danger they should ignore. Rayleigh made it clear that he wasn't doubting the mage's abilities. He simply believed it was best to avoid unknown variables. Aster replied that, in fact, that made perfect sense. The smarter someone was, the more they understood that unexpected risks were often the most dangerous ones. After that, he asked Oberon if he was doing all right. The young man answered that he was. As they continued their journey, Aster realized that Rayleigh's instincts were genuinely exceptional. Despite being a complete coward, Aster could feel enormous interference all around them, even with his enhanced senses. Even so, Rayleigh managed to find an ideal route that avoided nearly every danger along the way. The man was far more competent than he appeared. In the middle of their journey, they found a good spot beside a river and set up camp. They lit a campfire and prepared to rest. During that time, Aster noticed that Oberon was extremely nervous and anxious. He couldn't really blame him for it. Choosing the safe route had consumed their entire day. Oberon commented that perhaps they didn't need to remain idle for so long. The monster wave would arrive soon, and they needed to find the destroyer before the situation spiraled out of control. Besides, he felt that all of this was his fault. Hearing that, Aster found himself wondering why it felt like the kid was trying to turn him into a psychiatrist. However, before he could respond, something changed. The entire forest trembled once again. At the same instant, Rayleigh went on high alert and said they needed to run. That thing was coming straight toward them. The swamp ruler had appeared. He quickly explained that deep within the great forest of Hammern, there was a place known only as the Depths. The swamp ruler was one of the primordial creatures that had emerged from that place. No one knew exactly why the ancient being had abandoned the depths and built its lair in the wetlands. The problem was that, of all possible times, the creature had chosen to appear right now. It had not left the death swamp for centuries. Aster asked whether there was some way to avoid the monster and cross the wetlands by another route. Even if the entire swamp was under the creature's control, the area seemed far too large for it to monitor every part of it. Rayleigh replied that it wouldn't work. The moment someone touched the water, the swamp ruler would catch their scent and pursue them to the very end. Oberon then asked if they could search for another route. Rayleigh answered no. Going around the region would require a massive detour. That was precisely why guides worked so hard to ensure a safe passage through the wetlands. Such a detour would cost at least 10 days, perhaps even an entire month. If that happened, they would likely pass the first camp, then the second, and continue all the way to the third. The answer completely crushed Oberon's spirits. But then Aster stood up and declared that there would be no alternate route. They would cross the wetlands. Rayleigh thought he had failed to understand what an ancient species truly was. The swamp ruler was a monster that had fed upon countless soldiers, mages, and knights over the centuries. Aster replied that Rayleigh was the one who had the wrong idea. Rayleigh grew concerned and asked if he was suggesting they run through the swamp. But Aster shook his head. They weren't just going to cross it. They were going to kill the creature. Hearing that, Rayleigh nearly suffered a heart attack. Oberon, meanwhile, tried to argue that if Aster was doing all this for his sake, there was no need. He was already more than grateful that they had made it this far. Aster, however, told the boy to stop talking nonsense. If something needed to be done, then they should simply go and do it. Then he asked what Oberon would do when the destroyer appeared. Would he freeze in fear? And what if it became necessary to bring down his own master along with the destroyer? What would he do then? Oberon couldn't answer. That was why Aster ended the discussion by saying the decision had already been made. The swamp ruler would die the next day. Hearing that, Oberon stood up and said he could help. His talent had not fully awakened yet, but he was certain it would be useful. His gift was called Overload. He was capable of pushing a target's hidden potential to its absolute limit for a short period of time. That immediately caught Aster's attention, and he told the boy to explain in greater detail how the ability worked. The next morning, Oberon was sitting in front of the extinguished campfire, meditating. Sometime later, Aster returned from the forest. Oberon commented that he seemed quite busy so early in the morning. In reality, Aster had been carrying out his morning watch. Especially when traveling alongside idiots like those two, it was better to stay alert. Shortly afterward, he looked at Rayleigh and asked which tree he liked the most. The next time he tried to run away, Aster would tie him to it and let the wyverns eat him to their heart's content. The poor guide panicked and swore that he would never run away again. After that, the three of them had a hearty breakfast. Aster's body was in excellent condition. Now the only thing that truly mattered was making sure Oberon was prepared to put the plan into action. According to Rayleigh, however, he was nowhere near ready. Aster told the two of them to move back a little because it was time to put the plan into motion. Sometime later, he was already stepping into the waters of the wetlands. It was said that the moment someone entered that territory, the swamp ruler would begin tracking them without fail. To help the process along, Aster let a drop of his own blood fall into the crystal clear water and provoked the creature, telling it to come out and greet its guests. Or rather, to come out and receive a beating. The response came quickly. From the depths of the swamp emerged a gigantic creature. Its body was covered in grotesque fur, while enormous demon-like horns etched with ancient runes rose from its head. In the center of its face was a single eye, deep, abyssal, and mysterious. The moment the creature appeared, Aster signaled to Oberon. Without hesitation, the boy activated his full release and cast Overload on Aster. Instantly, the mage felt a sense of freedom spread throughout his body. It had been a very long time since he had been able to move like this. Lightning began coursing through his muscles while overwhelming energy enveloped him. The swamp ruler attacked immediately. Seeing that, Rayleigh grew concerned, believing Aster had been struck. However, when he looked more closely, he realized that Aster was already floating above the creature, casting multiple spells at the same time. As he gathered magic, Aster remarked that this overload ability was truly interesting. The previous night, Oberon had explained everything he knew about it. Not even he fully understood the mechanics behind full release and overload. It was said that the gift unleashed a potential that surpassed all known limits, yet even its user could not accurately explain how it worked. There was only one absolute rule. Overload lasted for only 5 minutes. Exceeding that limit was extremely dangerous. That was why everything had to end quickly. While reciting multiple fire spells simultaneously, Aster stated that 5 minutes were more than enough. Then he manifested the second stage of Crimson Fire. Ignition. The flames engulfed the swamp ruler, tearing a roar of pain from the creature. The most absurd part was that the fire continued burning even underwater. Witnessing that, everyone found themselves wondering what kind of monstrous spell it was. For a moment, Rayleigh thought the swamp ruler was lowering itself in fear, but he quickly realized his mistake. He shouted for Aster to be careful because the creature was about to roar. When the roar echoed across the swamp, the flames vanished instantly. The creature's cry had disrupted the spell's mana flow. Even so, Aster had expected no less from the swamp ruler. That was when Rayleigh finally decided to share an important piece of information. He told Aster not to stare into the creature's eye for too long. 3 seconds of eye contact were enough to completely freeze a target's mana. Upon hearing that, Aster was outraged and asked if he was only mentioning that now. Honestly, Rayleigh still couldn't believe what he was seeing. Not even when he was a child and heard the stories told by a veteran had he fully believed them. According to that man, subduing the swamp ruler was nearly impossible. Its roar distorted the surrounding mana, its gaze froze the magic of its enemies, and the skin hidden beneath its thick fur could repel even the aether used by nights. That was why the best thing anyone could do was never set foot within its territory. All this time, Rayleigh had seen that creature as a living nightmare. That was precisely why his first reaction to any problem was to run away. He shouldn't care about the deaths of a few mages. Planning for his own survival seemed far more reasonable. But as he looked at Aster, he realized that this guy was different. He was someone he could trust. Hearing that, Aster warned him that the two of them would be having a little chat later. Rayleigh replied that would only happen if they survived. Meanwhile, Aster was analyzing the situation. If the information was correct, he couldn't look into the creature's eyes for more than 3 seconds, so he would need to deal with that problem first. Without wasting any time, he closed the distance and charged straight toward the swamp ruler's eye. A burst of explosive blood struck the target. The creature lost its vision for a moment. When it managed to open its eye again, it was met with Aster's lightning-wreathed fist rushing toward it. Collision strike. The impact blew the creature's eye apart, but to the mage's surprise, its head remained almost completely intact. Even Aster had to admit that the monster was tough. The swamp ruler tried to crush him with its massive hands, but Aster withstood the attack and destroyed the creature's forelimbs in return. Then he declared that it was time to put an end to that ugly little beast. In truth, the entire fight had been a distraction while he prepared something. He wanted to test a new ability, Explosive Annihilation. Before the swamp ruler could react, Aster leaped straight into its mouth. Then the explosion happened. A gigantic flash illuminated the entire swamp. The creature was blown apart from the inside out. Later, Aster floated calmly on the water while observing the aftermath of the battle. He thought that a mere monster was still far from enough to test his true limits. That made him think of Farron. If the man hadn't been so exhausted when they fought that day, it might have been possible to kill him with Explosive Annihilation. On second thought, probably not. Farron would likely have been able to block the attack, but he certainly wouldn't have walked away smiling after taking a hit like that. No matter how durable a force field was, an explosion of that magnitude would tear through almost anything in its path. Meanwhile, the shattered body of the swamp ruler spread its poisonous, acidic, and horrifying blood through the translucent waters. Rayleigh and Oberon rushed over to surround Aster and check on his condition. At the same time, someone was watching the entire scene through the eyes of a crow. It was the formally dressed man who had previously been seen near the destroyer. He admitted that he truly hadn't expected anyone to kill an ancient species that had only been used as bait. Even more impressive was the fact that Aster had fought the creature in close combat and torn out its eye without the slightest hesitation. To that observer, the boy was a complete lunatic. The amount of energy released during the battle was far too great for the amount of mana he seemed to be using. He didn't exactly appear to be a mage, but neither did he fit the definition of a martial artist. It wasn't as though he himself would have been incapable of defeating the swamp ruler. Even so, what he had witnessed was a tremendous surprise. In fact, for a brief moment, he had even felt frightened. It was absolutely incredible. The ancient war mages were merely interesting trophies, but that boy was different. Now he wanted to hunt him. He felt an almost uncontrollable urge to kill him, but it wasn't the feeling of a hunter facing his prey. In truth, it was as if their roles were reversed. As a spirit who understood the thrill of the hunt better than anyone, he felt that perhaps he was the prey in that relationship. Because of that, he decided he would need to put a little more effort into his preparations, involving the destroyer. 2 hours after the battle, Aster woke up beside the campfire. His head was still spinning badly. Oberon explained that it was merely a side effect of overload. Since the duration of the ability had been kept short, the strain on his body had been minimal. Even so, he would probably continue feeling that way for the rest of the day. Aster felt as though he were suffering from a terrible hangover and was trembling from head to toe. If the others hadn't been there, he probably would have drowned in the swamp. While trying to recover, he asked where Rayleigh was. After quite some time, Rayleigh finally appeared, and Aster had honestly started to think the guy had run away. But Rayleigh explained that he hadn't been running. He said he had only been hiding in case they decided to beat him up again. At least, that was the joke. In reality, he had gone to inspect the swamp lord's corpse to see if he could find anything valuable. Then he asked whether Aster intended to do anything with the body. Aster replied that he didn't really care. He told Rayleigh he could keep it as payment for saving his life, and that he would even lend him his subspace to transport the corpse. Rayleigh immediately thanked him. Aster then handed over just one of the bags he had stolen from that black market dealer. Oberon asked whether he was sure about that decision, considering the monster's remains were supposedly worth a fortune. Meanwhile, Rayleigh was jumping around in celebration like a child. Aster merely commented that the man deserved to get something out of it as well, and that honestly, he had no use for the corpse. Oberon replied that he had always been taught that greed hindered training and corrupted the soul. For that reason, he considered the masked lord to be a truly noble person, someone who didn't care about material wealth and still looked after others. He then mentioned that the swamp lord's fur could block aether and might be used to craft armor or cloaks. However, Aster explained that monster materials frequently lost their special properties after death. All one had to do was look at how Rayleigh's cheap butchering knife was slicing through the corpse with ease. That meant the remains were practically worthless. After that, Oberon asked what the plan was. They were already behind schedule, but Rayleigh commented that they could still rest for another day along the way. Aster, however, rejected the idea. After everything they had been through, he just wanted to keep moving. Since they had rested during the afternoon, they resumed their journey at night. Eventually, they arrived at Base Camp 1. As he looked at the darkness surrounding the area, Aster asked whether the place was always this dark. Rayleigh explained that no one lit campfires after nightfall because the light attracted monsters. He also mentioned that they should first look for the camp chief. The place was managed by a group of mercenaries who charged a portion of the materials collected by any adventurer who stayed there. It was basically a tax, although many considered it nothing more than a polite form of banditry. At that moment, a voice replied that Rayleigh had become much bolder since the last time they met. Looking up at the wall, Rayleigh immediately recognized the man speaking. There stood Fixer, chief of Base Camp 1 and leader of the Aviote. Fixer jumped down from the wall, just to greet Aster, asking if he did not intend to shake his hand. He said he was only being polite. Aster replied that he did, and returned the greeting, shaking the man's hand. Then Fixer asked why he had done it like that. Aster replied that he had seen all kinds of strange things and assumed it was some sort of test. Beside them, Oberon swore he had heard something crack in Fixer's arm during the handshake. Aster then asked the reason for his visit. Fixer explained that he had a proposal. He had heard they intended to return to Base Camp 4. The information came from a scout who had mentioned it the last time he passed through. In fact, the man had bragged quite a bit about the plan he had devised to fool a naive mage. In any case, that was irrelevant. What Fixer wanted was simple. He wished to accompany them to Base Camp 4. According to him, camp chiefs had their own ways of gathering information. He knew something serious was happening over there. If Base Camp 4 fell, this place would likely be the next target. That was why he intended to fight. To Aster, it sounded like a great idea. The more help they had, the better. However, Oberon immediately rejected the offer. Aster could not understand why he had done that. Oberon then explained that the entire surrounding region had become a true land of death. It did not matter what Fixer had heard. The reality was far worse than any rumor could describe. Fixer asked whether that meant he could not go because the mission was suicidal. Oberon replied that, basically yes. At that moment, Fixer released part of his aura and called the young mage arrogant. He asked who he thought he was to make that decision for others. He said he had survived his entire life relying on nothing but his own sword. Perhaps he was only a despicable mercenary in their eyes, but he had things worth protecting and lines he would never cross. Because of that, he asked what right they had to stop him from fighting for his own home while they fought to defend theirs. He then remarked that he had expected more from one of Rohan's disciples, but the boy was full of nonsense. He would find a place for him to sleep later. For now, everyone should get inside. Aster simply concluded that the place was full of strange people. Since he was still soaked with swamp water, he decided to wash up first. Rayleigh replied that he would do the same. Oberon ended up staying behind, and Aster commented that he was a stubborn brat. Later that night, in the tent that had been prepared for him, Aster noticed that his body felt much better. He got up and went to find Fixer. He only wanted an honest conversation. When he saw him approaching, Fixer remarked that he was quite bold for someone so young. Aster asked how old he was. Fixer replied that he would turn 50 the following year. Aster observed that he had also been 50 the previous year, which earned an amused reaction. Then he got straight to the point. From what it seemed, Fixer truly intended to go to Base Camp 4 no matter the cost, so he asked why he simply did not travel with them. After all, he was surely not sulking because of what Oberon had said. If they were all heading to the same destination, it made sense to travel together. Fixer admitted that he had assumed the mage was the one making the group's decisions, but Aster replied that it only looked that way. He was not like that brat. At the very least, he tried to act according to his age, all 50 years of it. The remark almost made it sound as if he really were 50 years old, which only made the situation even more absurd. Aster then commented that the ether Fixer had displayed when he lost his patience with Oberon was something rarely seen. Fixer got straight to the point and asked whether he intended to use his men as human shields. Aster replied that it was a rather direct way of putting it, but admitted it was not entirely wrong. He then asked why Fixer kept refusing help in such a serious situation. In his opinion, he should be bringing back anyone who tried to flee. Fixer then asked whether he should consider that a formal request. Aster asked what more Fixer needed. The mercenary leader replied that he wanted an escape route. Only the veteran mercenaries would travel to Base Camp 4. The younger ones would be sent out of the Great Hamren Forest. Aster commented that it was almost touching of him. Fixer replied that it was not kindness but desperation. In any case, to organize the escape route, he needed Rayleigh. He needed a real scout. Rayleigh might have a terrible personality, but he was the best tracker in the forest. The proposal was simple. They would trade their scout for Rayleigh. The man they currently had was not skilled enough to find a path around the swamp. Aster replied that the problem was already solved. He asked how Fixer thought they had reached Base Camp 1 in the first place. If they had gone around the swamp, they would have ended up at the third camp, not this one. Surprised, Fixer asked whether the Swamp Lord had retreated. Aster replied that he had not. He simply said that he had personally sent him to the afterlife. The next morning, as the sun rose, the camp was already being dismantled. Fixer went to inspect the swamp ruler's corpse with his own eyes and, after staring at it for a while, asked who the hell that masked man really was. Aster replied that he was his employer, obviously. Then he asked whether Fixer had made his decision. The leader answered that he had. First, he would make sure the younger members left the forest safely, exactly as he had promised. Then he asked what Aster wanted in return. Aster replied that he wanted human shields. The mercenaries would escort his group to the 4th base camp. After that, they would be free to do whatever they wanted. He also commented that there was no need for so much formality. Maybe Fixer was 2 years older, but both of them were getting old anyway. Who cared about that? Fixer replied that the brat was obviously younger than him, but then again, maybe he was not. After all, someone who defeated the swamp ruler looked far more like a veteran mage who had taken a rejuvenation elixir than an ordinary young man. At that moment, a mercenary reported that the scouts had returned and that the camp was almost completely dismantled. Fixer simply ordered them to finish the job and gather everyone. They could not keep the employer waiting any longer. Sometime later, everyone had assembled for departure. Half of the mercenaries would head deeper into the Great Hammern Forest, while the other half would escort the younger members out of it. Fixer did not give a long speech. He merely told them to uphold the name of the Aviote, the name of those who had been their family, their masters, and their comrades. Some mercenaries began volunteering to go all the way into the depths of the forest and fight the creatures, but Fixer cut the discussion short immediately. He said their discipline had become far too lax. He did not want to hear arguments or debates. He ordered everyone to get moving and wait for instructions outside. Anyone who kept arguing would be beaten until they could no longer stand. The younger mercenaries were moved by his words, and some even cried silently. Noticing this, Fixer shouted for them to leave already. He did not want anyone standing around making a scene. Watching all of this, Aster found himself remembering people who were important to him. It was a rare occurrence. As they walked, Rayleigh asked whether the mercenaries were really coming with them. Aster replied that they were. After all, he had just heard the decision himself. Rayleigh commented that personally, he thought it was excellent news. It might not seem like much to a mage, but the Aviote mercenaries were special. They had protected the base camps and hunted monsters for nearly 200 years. Aster replied that, in that case, they certainly knew how to win. Rayleigh agreed. He doubted that any ordinary monster could be an obstacle for Aster, but the Aviote would still be an enormous help. Aster then asked whether he was not going to prepare for the journey. Rayleigh replied that everything was already ready. Aster looked at him for a few seconds and commented that there was no need to carry luggage when one was about to die. Desperate, Rayleigh immediately denied it. He explained that he had stored everything inside the subspace the mage had given him. Aster replied that it would at least make running away easier. Rayleigh insisted that he had no intention of fleeing, but if they survived all of this, he wanted to make a request. He asked whether Aster would be willing to hire him. He said that he could handle practically any job. He was excellent at temporary work and learned quickly. The answer pleased Aster. The young man was betting his very life. There was no lifeline stronger or more reliable than himself. It was true that he could end up killed by the Decula or become entangled with the Society of Forbidden Magic, but it was also true that the greatest rewards usually came from the greatest risks. Because of that, he replied that everything would depend on Rayleigh's performance. At that moment, Fixer approached and informed them that all preparations had been completed. There was no need for lengthy farewells. But before they departed, he wanted to ask for a favor. He asked whether Aster could persuade someone on his behalf. Upon hearing that, Aster immediately cracked his knuckles, ready to beat someone into submission. Fixer quickly explained that it was nothing like that. The person was not even there. He was at base camp too. He wanted Aster to try convincing Chief Hallig to join them. If that was not possible, he would at least like to borrow the vice captain. According to him, the man might be an ill-mannered bastard, but he was an excellent strategist. Meanwhile, at base camp 2, Hallig watched the final preparations. A guard reported that everything was ready for the journey to base camp 4. All that remained was to clear out the facilities. Hallig replied that they could forget about that. Even if the goblins occupied the place, they could simply take it back later. The guard thought that would only be possible if they returned alive. Sensing the mood, Hallig asked his strategist whether all of this did not seem pointless. He said that when he had finally reached the position of chief, he believed he had everything, yet he realized he still knew nothing. After all, he had never truly stood at the top. Then he remarked that he needed to die soon so someone else could take his place. The strategist asked him not to make such morbid farewell speeches. Hallig asked whether something unusual was happening. Then he answered his own question, saying that perhaps he was simply feeling a bit regretful. After all, it seemed that his time was approaching. The strategist asked whether he truly intended to join those Aviote lunatics. Hallig replied that he did not know whether they would be together, but they were certainly heading toward the same destination. Outraged, the strategist asked whether he had lost his mind. They were dealing with a destroyer. The creature had not even fully awakened, yet it was already causing mutations throughout the entire forest. Why would a mere mercenary get involved in something like that? It had never suited him. Hallig asked what kind of person he thought he was. The strategist replied that he had always chased the biggest payout possible. After smacking the young man on the head, Hallig explained that they would not find only mercenaries there. Veteran war mages would be present as well. Practically every respectable mage would be there to deal with the threat. But the strategist replied that everyone else was just a bunch of cowards. All one had to do was look around. There were enough deserters to fill 3 carriages. Then he once again asked Hallig to reconsider the journey to base camp 4. Hallig asked whether he was afraid of dying. The strategist replied that he was. Of course he was. He did not want to die. Hallig then said that, in that case, he could take over leadership. At least once in his life, he should sit in the chief's chair. He did not need to inherit the mercenary company's name. He could run everything his own way, change the rules, or even change the company's name. From that moment onward, he was the new chief of the Vittoria mercenaries. Halleck began to say that he was certain the young man would figure out what to do with that name and with the people of the second base camp. But before he could finish his sentence, something happened. A hand pierced through his back and stabbed straight through his heart. The attack came without warning. As Halleck coughed up blood, the figure behind him remarked that the farewell had been truly moving. What a shame, because his plan was to send every last one of them to hell. Faced with that scene, the strategist immediately flew into a rage, but Halleck kicked him away to make sure he survived. After all, he was the boss now. From a distance, Astor noticed that and commented that there was definitely some trash nearby. The next day, while the mercenaries continued their journey, monsters appeared along the path, including a giant orc. That didn't even make Astor move a muscle. Trolls and orcs had already become a common sight. The deeper they ventured into the great forest of Hammern, the more truly dangerous monsters began to appear. Even so, the mercenaries were good at what they did. The chain squad immobilized the creature while the spearmen pierced it to death. Astor immediately realized they were seasoned veterans, far better than he had expected. Fixer apologized for the group's performance, explaining that they were still getting back into rhythm. The older mercenaries usually handled the chains, while the disposal squad was always made up of the younger members. Even so, he assured Astor that it would not delay their schedule. Rayleigh explained to Astor that those chains were forged from an ore found within the forest itself. Even knowing that, Astor remained impressed by the strength and coordination of Aviote's mercenaries. Shortly afterward, Oberyn approached Fixer to apologize for what had happened that night. In response, Fixer apologized as well and told him not to dwell on it. Nobody could be perfect all the time. What mattered was learning from one's mistakes. Oberyn immediately agreed. Fixer then asked him to help the veterans, since they were getting old and their bodies were no longer what they used to be. Oberyn went to help without complaint, but during their work the group discovered a collapsed body. The person was not dead, only unconscious. It was Plen, strategist and vice captain of the second base camp. Something had clearly happened there, but Astor was not surprised. The rats of forbidden magic were already several steps ahead of them. They might have even interfered with fate itself. Without wasting any time, Astor declared that they needed to leave immediately and took command of the expedition. Along the way, a troll had its head blown apart by him without a fight ever taking place. Several wyverns appeared and were brought down as if they were nothing. An entire field of poisonous herbs was burned away without difficulty. Seeing that, Rayleigh asked what had gotten into Astor all of a sudden. Fixer simply told him not to think too much about it and to keep walking. After several days of travel, Rayleigh informed them that they were close to the second base camp. The moment he heard that, Astor shot ahead, running in a hurry. The mercenaries quickened their pace to keep up with him. Up to that point, Plen still had not regained consciousness. As they approached the location, Fixer caught a terrible smell in the air. At the second base camp, every body had been impaled, with blood running down the roots of the trees. It had been done deliberately. It was a message. At that moment, Astor walked over to Plen and started slapping his face until he woke up. He might have used a little too much force. Confused, Plen asked where he was and who those people were. Astor ignored everything and asked only one question. He wanted to know what had happened there. When Plen finally saw the massacre with his own eyes, he fell into complete shock. Later, while they dealt with the aftermath at the second base camp, the bodies were burned so they could receive a proper farewell. Throughout the entire process, Plen remained almost completely motionless. Watching the situation, Fixer commented that Astor could be cruel sometimes. There had been no need to wake Plen right in front of that scene. Astor replied that he simply wanted him to see his companions with his own eyes. For now, that was better than carrying everything alone. Hearing that, Fixer sensed a strange emptiness hidden behind the young contractor's voice. He sounded like someone who had lost countless friends before. But that was beside the point. Fixer then said it was time to explain what was really happening and asked whether Astor already knew about the man in black robes mentioned by Plen. Astor confirmed that he did. Everything was connected. The man in black, the destroyer, and the entire situation were all part of the same scheme. On top of that, those arrogant fools had left him a blatant invitation. They had deliberately left behind a trail of mana to make sure he noticed it. Fine, he would play their game. That damn anti-mage had gotten his attention. While Fixer remained at the second base camp, Astor set off alone. Before leaving, he warned them that if he did not return by the following morning, they could continue without him. He would catch up quickly afterward. Watching him depart, Fixer thought that the man truly was a complete mystery. As he ran through the night, Astor realized that this entire affair was directly connected to his past life. Everything led back to Salvatio, the Association of Forbidden Magic. They were the ones who had given that artifact to Friesen when he was on the run, and now they had the audacity to send an invitation like this. After operating in the shadows for so long, the persistence of that organization was truly frightening. Perhaps it was time to teach them a lesson. Thinking that, he remarked that it was a perfect day to beat someone up, and asked whether the crow agreed. In reality, the message was directed at the person behind the bird. The response came immediately. The voice agreed, saying that it truly sounded like prey worthy of being hunted. It also stated that it was time to check whether everything was ready to begin, and it agreed with Astor. It was a beautiful day. As he said that, he began summoning his undead. Before long, Astor was surrounded by an entire army of undead creatures. He remarked that everyone should feel honored. After all, they even had a familiar guiding the way and eliminating every monster ahead of them. Everything was going far too smoothly. That was when he found himself trapped inside a massive ritual circle. A voice began reciting that whoever killed the 13 sinners would bear the weight of all sins upon themselves. Soon afterward, the black mage responsible for the trap appeared and declared that the honor was entirely his, calling Aster a hunter. He also said he hoped Aster would enjoy what he had prepared. Aster replied that he absolutely loved it. At the same time, he snapped the neck of the first enemy and used the man's blood to create an arrow that pierced the heads of every other opponent at once. The arrow nearly struck the black mage himself, but he managed to block it with his staff. The scythe-shaped blade attached to the weapon's tip glowed once more. The black mage commented that it was quite an interesting spell, but reminded Aster that he was standing inside the ritual of the 13 sins. Then he ordered his most loyal servant to awaken, the Death Knight. The command was simple: bring the masked little mage back alive. Without hesitation, the massive undead charged forward and swung its enormous sword, attempting to crush Aster. The black mage even complained, reminding the knight that he had ordered it not to kill the target, calling it an old tin can. Even so, the attacks continued. The reason was simple: Aster was still alive. He answered with nothing but his fist. The punch was so powerful that it knocked the weapon from the Death Knight's hands, creating an opening. The two immediately began exchanging blows directly. Fist against fist, man against undead. Watching the battle, the black mage realized he was completely confused. This was one of the 13 sins, a distorted power that was not ordinary magic. The masked man should have been broken, on the verge of death, yet he remained there perfectly fine. At the same time, the Death Knight could not access the full extent of its original power, but the body serving as its vessel had once belonged to a master knight in his prime. Even so, Aster fought it on equal footing, trading punches and even denting its helmet through sheer brute force. Realizing that his creation would be destroyed if things continued at that pace, the black mage decided to intervene. He cast the curse of slowness and imprisonment upon Aster. An instant later, the master knight's sword pierced through Aster's chest. The black mage believed he had landed a decisive blow. In his eyes, that idiot had become so focused on the Death Knight that he would soon be nothing more than another corpse for his collection. What he did not expect was the tiny spark of lightning that appeared immediately afterward. Electricity spread through the rain falling across the battlefield and exploded in every direction. The black mage lost a large portion of his power and coughed up blood when he realized that both of his legs had been torn away by the electrical blast. That was when Aster remarked that this Death Knight was different from the others. He asked whether the man was the famous forbidden mage, and even removed his mask so they could speak properly. Before that, however, he established 3 rules. The first was to be careful with one's eyes, and preferably, keep them fixed on one's own feet. The black mage responded by glaring at him with fury. As a result, Aster pierced both of his eyes, and asked whether he was now willing to be polite. The second rule was simple: no tricks. The last person Aster had spared had tried to attack him by surprise. The third rule was to answer everything honestly. Only then did the interrogation begin. He asked whether the mage had come alone, whether the true target had been the destroyer, and why he was being hunted. Finally, he revealed the symbol marked on his chest, and asked if the mage had ever seen it before. Aster knew that this was a forbidden black mage, someone who practiced arts capable of defying the natural order of the world. Perhaps he knew something about the stigma. Only then did Aster realize a small problem. He had just stabbed out the man's eyes. Obviously, the mage could not see any symbol at all. Amused by his own oversight, Aster simply dropped the matter. Next, he tried to gather information about Salvatio. He knew that forbidden mages often meddled with corpses, but he was careful to reveal as little as possible about himself. When he asked about the organization's true objective, the man tried to answer. At that exact moment, he died. It was a sudden death, as if some kind of restriction had been implanted in his body by Salvatio herself. Fortunately, Aster had managed to ask a few other questions beforehand, or the whole thing would have been a complete disaster. Even he ended up coughing up blood. The situation was starting to irritate him. At least the stigma on his chest had reacted when the curse was activated. Otherwise, he might have died. Even so, he had nearly lost his life just to capture someone of that level. After catching his breath, he looked at the necromancer's corpse and wondered what to do about the Death Knight. The creature's control item had to be hidden somewhere. After a quick search, he found it among the dead man's robes. The moment he took control, the Master Knight began obeying his commands. Looking at him closely, Aster noticed just how absurdly large he was. He asked him to kneel so they could stand at eye level, and told him that he was free now. He no longer had to serve anyone and could finally rest in peace. The knight thanked him for his freedom. Invisible chains shattered around him, and his soul was finally released from the prison that had kept him trapped in that state. Aster thought that would be their farewell, but the knight remained standing there. Then he remarked that Aster looked like a brat, but had an incredibly foul mouth. Confused, Aster replied that he was free and asked why he had not yet passed on. The knight explained that freedom meant having the ability to choose, and his choice was to remain in this world. Not knowing how to respond, Aster simply told him to enjoy his freedom because he was leaving. The knight answered that he would guide the way, causing Aster to let out a curse of disbelief. The knight took the opportunity to comment on his language once again. He said that even in death, he had lived many times longer than Aster. Aster shot back back that death did not care about age. The man replied that he had already crossed to the other side once, and could therefore be considered a veteran of death. Realizing that arguing was pointless, Aster simply gave up. The two walked until dawn. Only then did they decide to introduce themselves properly. Aster asked whether he had once been a master knight of some prestigious house. The man replied that, even if his house had once been prestigious, it probably no longer existed. After all, he came from the year 137 of the imperial calendar. Hearing that, Aster explained that the current year was 374. The knight was surprised and asked whether houses Nortel and Dolan Fay still existed. Aster replied that both were still going strong, but he abruptly cut the conversation short when he noticed the man already drawing his sword. Resisting the urge to smack him over the head, Aster finally asked for his name. The knight replied that this was how introductions were supposed to happen, and remarked that children of this era seemed to have even worse manners than those of his own generation. The comment irritated Aster so much that it reminded him of the director. At last, the man introduced himself as Shine von Lehmans, Master Knight of House Lehmans. The moment he heard that name, Aster was stunned. He was standing before the legendary Shine von Lehmans, the infamous Kingslayer, the man who had gone down in history as a traitor, yet carried countless other titles, a genius who appeared only once in a generation, a born warrior, a master of every weapon, and also the tragic genius who lost his mind after the fall of House Lehmans. Aster knew exactly who he was. Shine von Lehmans had reached the rank of Master Knight at the age of 18. An asset of that caliber was far too valuable to ignore. With the Destroyer and the Golden Mages emerging as threats, someone of his level could become the perfect ally. So Aster removed his mask and directly asked whether he would like to work alongside him. When he mentioned the Dark Mage who had torn him from his eternal rest and turned him into a puppet, he also asked whether he did not desire revenge. Shine von Lehmans' expression changed instantly. The pressure radiating from him became terrifying. He asked whether that man was still alive. Aster explained that he was not. The man they had fought was merely a low-ranking lackey. Perhaps Shine would not even remember him, considering he had been treated as nothing more than a tool. According to the necromancer himself, he had been far too weak to be useful. Upon hearing that, Shine von Lehmans declared that he would tear him apart. Aster replied that, even if he wanted to kill him, finding him would not be easy. When the knight asked whether he knew where the culprit was, Aster answered that he only had a few clues. By coincidence, he also had unfinished business with that individual. But information was not something he handed out for free, so he repeated the same proposal. What did he think about working together? Shine von Lehmans replied that he felt as though he was being manipulated. Even so, he did not particularly mind. In any case, he had already intended to accompany Aster for a while. As they traveled together, he would hunt for the answers he sought himself. In the end, the two shook hands and forged an alliance as comrades. When they returned to the second base camp, Fixer was the first to notice their arrival. He said that Aster had finally returned, but then pointed at the gigantic figure behind him and asked what the hell that thing was. Aster asked the two of them to stop trying to intimidate each other, and then told someone to bring Rayleigh, Oberon, and Plen as well. There was something very important he needed to tell them. Once everyone had gathered, Aster asked if they had rested well. Rayleigh replied that he had barely rested at all, considering he had been working himself to death while someone else wandered around doing nothing. In response, he received several smacks to the head. Soon after, Aster turned his attention to Plen, the mercenary who had witnessed a good portion of the mess that had taken place there. The man looked as though he was practically overflowing with poison from sheer anger. Aster asked if he was still upset about the beating he had received the day before, and told him to calm down, since it had only been meant to wake him up. If he kept staring like that, he was going to burn a hole through the mask. Then he explained the reason for his disappearance the previous day. He recounted everything that had happened, and revealed that the man standing beside him was a Death Knight. At that moment, Shine von Lehmans pulled back his hood, fully revealing his appearance, and the terrifying pressure radiating from him. Seeing that, Oberon immediately warned his superior. A Death Knight was a cursed monster. Bringing a creature like that into the camp sounded insane, but Aster did not seem concerned in the slightest. He asked what exactly the problem was. Were they supposed to cut off his head just because he was a cursed monster? Shine von Lehmans calmly remarked that cutting off his head would not kill him anyway. Aster then got straight to the point. He asked Oberon whether he truly believed he could fight better than that man. Without hesitation, Shine von Lehmans answered for him. I would crush him. Aster went on to explain that he had reached the rank of Master Knight while he was alive. He was not just another undead. Did they have any idea how many mercenaries a monster of that caliber was worth, all by himself? At that moment, Shine von Lehmans decided to speak for himself. He told the young mage that he had originally been a knight loyal to the Emperor. As Aster had said, he truly was a monster now. However, his heart remained exactly the same. He asked whether anyone there had any idea what kind of agony a soul transformed into an undead endured. Even in that state, without flesh or blood, he still felt pain. It was as though flames continuously consumed his entire being. Despite that, he remained a proud knight of the Emperor. Then his voice grew heavier as he spoke of the necromancer. That dark mage had insulted his loyalty, desecrated his honor, and turned his knightly heart into a tool. That was his true suffering. He wanted revenge. He wanted to tear that bastard apart with his own hands. But he also understood that they had no reason to trust him yet. So he raised his sword and handed it to Oberon. He declared that he swore upon the honor of his lord, and would accept death at Oberon's hands if that was what he wished. The gesture caught everyone by surprise. Oberon immediately apologized, calling him a noble knight. He admitted that he knew nothing of his story or the suffering he carried. Though he still maintained a degree of caution, he could not help but feel respect for someone capable of enduring such pain. Meanwhile, Shine von Lemons discreetly turned toward Aster with an expression of obvious satisfaction. At that exact moment, Aster realized that the bastard was thoroughly enjoying every second of the dramatic performance he had just put on. To Aster, the whole thing became even more absurd when he remembered one very important detail. The famed Emperor's sword was the very sword that had decapitated the Emperor himself. Son of a bitch. Even so, Aster had to admit one thing. It took a tremendous amount of courage to kill an emperor. By the time night fell, everyone was already preparing to depart. Although Aster had kept the details regarding Salvatio and the Golden Mages to himself, they all now knew that a new enemy was moving in the shadows. From that point onward, the mercenaries' lives would no longer be so simple or flexible. Each of them would move forward carrying their own convictions. Some fought for survival, others for justice, some for their families, and there were even those driven solely by revenge. As for Aster, he had no grand speech prepared. At the end of the day, he was simply willing to see this whole mess through to the very end.